Release that which I by Ermo. Chapter 341, Transport Route. Upon Vader's departure, Carter leaned towards the king and asked, "Your Highness, do you have any idea who sent those people here? If we exclude the church, the person who possessed the pills would be Timothy. Garcia already keeps her distance from Grey Castle, and it is highly unlikely she would still care about me." Roland heaved a sigh. Comparing them, it is much more likely to be Timothy. While he is more cautious about sending a large army away from the capital, that does not mean that he would not retaliate against me. It was lucky that the attackers hidden among the crowd had carried pills instead of covering their bodies with gunpowder. Had they blown up in the crowd, 2 months' effort would have been wasted. Roland was not worried that any so-called suicide squad his brother dispatched would have harmed him. On days the Nightingale was out, he had an escort of at least 10 bodyguards with him at all times, and for additional protection wore a God's punishment stone. When faced with the suppression of 10 revolving firearms, even a witch extraordinaire would have difficulty approaching him, let alone a group of people with berserker pills. In the short time since he had assumed the role of a feudal lord, less than a year, he found that his mentality had undergone tremendous changes. When he had begun this role, an incident such as this would have left him very afraid, to the point where his legs would have given way and he would have been at a complete loss. However, now, although he felt somewhat anxious earlier, he was still able to assume a calm expression and a composed demeanor. The reason for this change was because he had faith that his guards would put themselves in harm's way for him and trusted them to protect him from enemies, regardless of the peril they faced. Furthermore, it was forbidden for him to lose any self-control, as he was the focus of the masses. Contemplating this, it shocked him that he would think so far. Round up the people from the missionary mission and ask them the specifics of the recruitment process. Roland turned towards Barav and said, "I need to know where those people boarded the sailboats." "Yes, Your Highness," said the City Hall's Prime Minister, with a somewhat gloomy expression on his face. He probably hadn't expected his subordinates, whom he was so proud of, to commit such a large blunder. He felt that his dignity had been completely besmirched by this. "You shouldn't criticize them too harshly either. You can decide what to do with them after you straighten everything out." After all the refugees made it through the checkpoint, Roland returned to his office in the castle. This time, the news brought back by the missionary group was a particularly nice surprise. On the southern border were a large number of the destitute and homeless. The flames of war ravaged Eagle City and Clearwater Port, while the fields around the city had been abandoned. On top of that, the fluctuating weather this year had caused the temperatures in various areas of Grey Castle to plummet. Because of this, the price of grain surged, increasing day by day, and the price of slaves had reduced by half. As long as he could establish a reliable passageway for transport, he would be able to draw an unending number of people through the western border. In actuality, when the refugees heard how developed Border Town was, and that it was actively trying to recruit them, a sizable number decided to set off towards the town on their own. That was the report given to him by the missionary group. However, the greatest difficulty would be establishing a passageway for it. During the month of the Demon, all land traffic was halted by the sheer volume of snow, leaving the Redwater River as the only method of transport. The only boat that could travel the river was Little Town, which wouldn't budge without the help of a witch. Just this boat would be vastly incapable of transporting everyone. If he wanted ships sailing the waterway at all times, he would have to invest in the construction of at least 20 sailboats capable of sailing inland. An apt example of the situation he faced would be the difficulties the missionary group had encountered. With all of the gold royals they had brought with them, only a small portion went towards roping in the refugees, the rest was used to hire boats and pay for housing arrangements for personnel. At the moment, less than 400 people had arrived in Border Town, while the other 3,000 or more remained waiting in Willow Town, Silver City, and Fallen Dragon Ridge for ships to transport them inland. Because they were aware of the conditions in the western region, various captains had raised their prices to insanely high levels. The fees for the 3,000-plus people would be already as high as that of the large-scale rescue operation they had previously held in the capital. Roland, after giving the situation a moment's contemplation, decided that it would be wise to send a letter requesting assistance to Margaret's Chamber of Commerce. He hoped that the latter would not go so far as to give him a quote several times higher, on account of lightning. However, if he was truly dedicated to cutting down his expenses, he knew that he would have to build his own ship. As of now, the quality of reinforced steel and cement had greatly improved. It was wholly viable to build larger, sturdier inland ships with those materials. With a steam engine for propulsion, the ship would serve as the groundwork of the transportation industry within the Redwater River. After he finished dinner in his office, Berev knocked on the door, opened it, and said, "Your Highness, I have more or less ascertained the situation." "Speak." "There's an apprentice of mine called Salem who is in charge of enticing the refugees in the northern lands. As he was faced with a lack of boats in the midst of returning, he contacted some friends he had met in the capital in hopes that they could help him make some inquiries or employ a couple of merchant ships that were willing to head towards the western border." Berev sighed and continued, "The news must have leaked from there. He had arranged some places for the refugees in Silver City, a little less than half a day away from the capital. I imagine it wouldn't be difficult at all if Timothy wished to tamper with it. As of this moment, how many people are still being retained in Silver City?" "Roughly 800 of them." Berev began to speak in a low voice. "It takes about half-month for the merchant ships to do a round trip. We will still be unaware on how the situation unfolds when the next batch of refugees arrive. How about, we immediately recall the small group of First Army soldiers in that area and abandon the refugees?" "No, no. We will just have to get rid of the people Theodore planted within the group, no matter how many of them there are. So long as the audit checkpoints were properly managed by that time, we can simply get them to pass through it individually." Roland shook his head and continued, "What would we do if the refugees, who we abandoned and left to their own devices, went back to the northern lands and proclaimed their fate to others? If that happened, we would not be able to recruit refugees from the northern islands anymore." Under the interrogation of Sylvie's X-ray vision, as well as Nightingale's lie detection, any spy or assassin would have no way to conceal themselves. Thus, he wasn't that worried about it. As long as they didn't hurt the other refugees, he was fine with it. "Yes, Your Highness." Berev coughed twice before he opened his mouth and asked, "In that case, for Salem's punishment, what do you have in mind?" He hesitated for a moment and said, "As the birth of this incident was a result of his excessive carelessness, I suggest stripping him of his post in the city hall and a fine amounting 2 months his salary. As his mistake wasn't intended, and didn't cause too much damage either, I believe it'd be excessive if we sent him into the northern mines." Roland couldn't hold back his loud laughter. Berev's heartache was written all over his face. "Calm down, I have already made my decision. Seeing the reason he committed this mistake was, subjectively, not a dereliction of duty, I can give him a lighter punishment. After all, it can be considered as his first time undertaking such a post. As I recall, he is only in his 20s, right? Since that's the case, it is certain he will mature rapidly after this lesson. Giving him a 2 months fine will do." "Understood." Berev immediately bowed and said, "Everything shall be handled as you said." While shaking his head, the prince smiled. Although Berev had started in an unbelievable harsh manner, when it came time to truly punish Salem, he displayed an obvious reluctance. After all, Salem had always been by his side when he was in the capital and was also from the first batch of disciples who had come to Border Town. "You may leave." Roland stretched his back after dealing with this matter. Taking a few sheets of white paper from his drawers, he planned to sketch out the plans of the steam engine-powered cement boat when Leaf suddenly ran into his room. "Your Highness," she excitedly said, "the Hawkeye is back." "Really?" Roland slowly got up to his feet. Following behind her, they quickly reached the back garden, only to see a massive hot air balloon slowly descending to the ground. The shadow cast by its air sac caused the sunlight in the courtyard to darken somewhat. The moment the basket touched the ground, Anna jumped out. With both hands outstretched, Roland began to walk towards her while the former mirrored him while wearing a light smile. "I have returned." Chapter 342, Countermeasures. Don't forget about me. Lighting rushed over. I want one too, Nana exclaimed. Goo. Maggie called out soon after. Roland simply stood in place, letting each member of the witch union hug him in turn. When Tilly saw, she couldn't help laugh. You really have a harmonious relationship with them. You want to hug your big brother too? No thanks, she said, smiling as she shook her head. I can still clearly remember that time you lifted me up and then dropped me on the ground. Roland only shrugged his shoulders to express his innocence, then shifted his gaze over to the woman Ashes was holding. She had a head of ocean blue hair, looked fairly young, with a figure similar to Anna's. Her eyes were tightly shut and her slender eyebrows were slightly upturned. She had fair skin, and the teardrop mole at the corner of her eye appeared particularly eye-catching. Based on external appearances, she didn't look like someone who had been imprisoned in the basement of a stone tower at all. Instead, she gave off a bit of a Sleeping Beauty vibe. However, her physical appearance led to Roland paying more attention to her outfit in this age. Clothing with such a diverse and intricate design was scarcely seen. Because there was such a small assortment of dyes, the violet color of the robe itself was extremely rare. With the addition of those interlacing white stripes and talisman prints, it resembled one of those gorgeous gowns that could only be seen in movies. This was definitely a piece of Orange One equipment. Is she still alive? Yeah, Nightingale replied, but the magic in her body has been depleted. It seems similar to Anna's condition back when she reached adulthood. But unlike Anna, the recovery speed of her magic is unusually slow. At this rate, she might need 3 to 4 days before she returns to normal. In that case, we'll let her sleep properly, Roland nodded. I will tidy up a room on the 3rd floor of the castle for her to rest. The others should return to the hall first. He paused. I want to hear the tales of your travels. After listening to Tilly and Nightingale's accounts, Roland couldn't help but feel nervous for them. Although Sylvie provided a full picture, going deep underground in pursuit of a huge demonic beast they had never seen before was a very dangerous affair. If it were him, he may have still been hesitant. He never expected that Tilly would be so decisive. She picked out suitable members for the task in a short amount of time and even led the team herself. Her appointment as the leader of so many witches wasn't just due to her identity as a princess. At the time, did you think that this earth-drilling worm had something to do with the devils? I don't know, but it's not impossible, Tilly replied leisurely. A witch from the Cooperation Association once encountered devils who were riding some kind of hybrid demonic beast in the wild. The beast's fleshy wings were cut off and they heeded the devil's orders, sort of like tamed livestock. And behind the snowy mountains, you can also see creatures that are capable of flight. Those look completely different to devils, perhaps they're another kind of demonic beast. So isn't it possible to surmise that devils and demonic beasts have a subordinate relationship, just like that of humans and hounds? They may have some method of making these monsters obey their orders, and compel them to complete a few fairly problematic tasks. I feel like it really does seem like it. Roland nodded, but his mind was clouded in incomprehensible uncertainty throughout her explanation. Demonic beasts would only take the initiative to attack human dwellings during the months of demons, but that did not mean they only lived during the months of demons. The moss and weeds growing on the carapaces of the sieging beasts were proof that these creatures had survived for tens of years. Assuming that the reason those devils were unable to rapidly occupy the entire wilderness and completely expel humans from the continent was due to being confined within the red mist, then they are free to constantly send demonic beasts to harass the 4 great kingdoms instead of waiting until winter to take action again. Furthermore, it was hard to forget the intelligence of that wolf-lion demonic beast hybrid that once fought Iron Axe during the months of demons. In the first year it differed from the clever animals that followed their instincts. It was able to learn, analyze, and choose the best target and course of action. This already at a level that the vast majority of living creatures could never hope to reach. If long-lived demonic beast hybrids could possess such intellect, it would be impossible for them to be tamed by another race. But compared to the subterranean demonic beasts, I think that the enemy Miss Nightingale encountered outside the stone tower is more concerning. Tilly sighed. It was able to conceal itself in broad daylight and moved so silently. It's practically impossible to defend against. It's a pity we know too little about demonic beasts. I have no idea how to handle such a terrifying enemy. If Nightingale had not witnessed it with her own eyes, I would not believe that such demonic beasts really exist. Roland shrugged as he spoke. But it seems they have never appeared at the western border. Otherwise, if just a few of them came every winter, Longsong's stronghold would have long turned to ruins. But as the months of demons grow longer, the demonic beasts grow stronger. This is the conclusion reached by the history books. This time, the first snowfall began in autumn, so the enemy we face may be very formidable. Tilly's use of the word "we" made Roland's heart grow warm. Whether she treated him as a brother or not, she already considered him and this small town as one of her own allies. At least this was probably done for the sake of the witches. Then we can only leave the surveillance of the perimeters to Nightingale. No, let Sylvie stand guard this winter, Tilly said. The city walls are divided into two sections, east and west. To do a single circuit of the place would take almost a quarter of an hour. Miss Nightingale's workload would be too great. Sylvie only needs to stay inside the castle and she would be able to observe the entire region of the city walls. She would also be able to inform the other witches immediately upon discovering a demonic beast. That's fine too. Roland nodded. That witch, Scroll hesitated for a moment. I still have the same opinion as before. As long as her identity has yet to be confirmed, she could very well be an enemy. I know, which is why I will have her wear a god's stone of retaliation for the time being. He exhaled a breath of air. Hopefully this won't cause her to misunderstand us. Roland entered the bedroom of the unconscious witch. Anna was the only one left inside the room, looking after her alone. How is she? Anna shook her head. Still no response. Is that so? Roland walked over to the bedside, the woman lying still under the blankets. Although her eyes remained tightly shut, the wrinkles between her brows seemed to have reduced. Nana and Lily had already used their abilities on her, so the only thing they could do now was to wait quietly. She was frozen for so long, yet not a single trace of that remains. It's really incredible. He lamented. It's similar to how I don't fear any flames, Anna chuckled. Her ability definitely plays a part. I heard that you were the one who opened the ice coffin. Roland pat her on the head. You're amazing, Anna. I can't take all the credit, Anna said earnestly. This witch made use of her ability in a very ingenious way. She first used cold ice at an extremely low temperature to completely stop all circulation in her body, then used ice crystals that were close to room temperature to fully seal the cold ice inside to prevent it from thawing. She has surely reached a very high level of control over her abilities. Ice that approached room temperature. This phrase sounded very contradicting, but Roland understood that the abilities of summon-type witches were unique manifestations of magic, similar to the black flames that were capable of casually taking up different forms and temperatures. Anna paused for a moment before continuing. I had only just cut through the outer layer of ice crystals when the whole ice coffin immediately fell apart, like it was an opening she deliberately left behind. So, I think she had been anticipating this day for a while now. By that you mean? She is certain to wake up. Chapter 343, Re-establishing Order. Master, the city walls have been breached. I'm afraid the Allied armies won't be able to endure for much longer. Let's leave quickly. She could already hear the sounds of combat coming from outside. When she left the tower, she saw the gloomy clouds in the sky emitting a dim red light, resembling a clump of viscous blood. But my younger sister still hasn't returned yet. She's a soldier of the garrison, she can't leave her post on the perimeter without permission. Kraft's voice grew more anxious. If you die here, you'll be throwing away her good intentions. After hesitating for a while, she finally nodded in acquiescence. I understand. The streets were filled with people fleeing while the guards maintained order within this impending doom. Amidst the stream of people, she was forced to follow everyone towards the south gate. Kraft closely followed beside her the whole time, and even used his sturdy body to protect her from being crushed by the frantic crowd. It was a crushing defeat. Is this where we fall? She cast her gaze towards the Tower of Babel behind them. It was the highest point in the city, as well as the core of the Federation. Flying devils had carried mad demons over to attack the top of the tower. Lightning would occasionally flash, striking the devils down. Nevertheless, everything was to no avail. There were simply too many enemies. After several hundred years of construction and development, this city had become the most flourishing of fertile lands, the Holy City. But today, it seemed like it would soon fall to ruin, and the efforts of several generations of people would inevitably be lost, like children spending a whole afternoon building a sandcastle, only for it to be instantly reduced to sand once again in the wake of chaos and disorder. When they passed through the south gate, the devils had already rushed over to intercept them. Those who were still able to fight readily stepped up to fight them alongside the guards. But not only did the other side have mad demons, there were also Dreadheart demons and infernal lords. The disparity between the strengths of both sides was too extreme. Dozens of people lay in a pool of blood after the first wave of spears were thrown. Some had iron spears piercing through their abdomen, their warm intestines spilling out onto the ice-cold snowy ground. Some had their limbs cut off and were crying out in anguish while clutching their wounds. "Master, what are you trying to do?" Kraft grabbed onto her. "I can fight too." She took a deep breath of air. "Let me go." "No, your importance far outstrips them. You can't." "Let go." Her magic bubbled forth, filling the surroundings with cold air as she shook off the other's grip. She then strode forward without looking back. She felt her heart gradually tighten when she saw the enemies a mere 100 paces away, wearing ferocious-looking battle masks and holding weapons that were dripping with blood. But even so, she wasn't willing to continue hiding behind everyone as a witch of the Holy City. Even if she were to die, she should die on the battlefield. "Everyone, step aside." At this moment, a clear command resounded from one side of the battlefield as a person fell from the sky, just like a god descending. With her back to everyone, she raised the long sword in her hand up high. Her long auburn hair resembled a flame, igniting hope in everyone in a flash. A holy warrior of the Federation. She is a witch extraordinaire. Amidst the voices of astonishment, the edge of her sword started glowing with a brilliant radiance, quickly transforming the sword into a dazzling gold like the dawning sun, each ray of brilliance shining over the earth. Even the dark red clouds that dominated the skies did not dare obstruct the light, reflecting countless golden tassels below the layer of clouds. As the rays of light ascended towards the summit, she leaped forward and brandished her longsword against the devils that came to attack. The silence was deafening. At that moment, time seemed to have stopped as a bright incandescence engulfed the world and the figures of the enemy mirrored the final hints of darkness at daybreak. Whether it were the mad demons or the infernal lords, they all crumbled before this ray of light. When she opened her eyes once again, the snowy ground before her eyes had already turned into scorched earth, and the approaching enemies seemed to never have existed. The other devils witnessing this scene all retreated in conjunction as more holy warriors arrived, joining the battlefield to pursue those fleeing enemies and breaking the encirclement. "You guys go quickly." The sword-wielding witch seemed to have exhausted all of her strength as she kneeled down on the ground with one knee and gasped for breath. "Take advantage of the moment and quickly leave this place." "But, milady, where can we go?" someone in the crowd asked. "Right, where can we go?" she thought bitterly. Even their final stronghold, the Holy City, had fallen to the assault of the devils, with tens of thousands of lives lost and no more tricks up their sleeve. They could no longer recover from this losing battle. "Do not give up, we still have hope." The red-haired witch said resolutely, "We'll head over the mountain and across the river, to the desolate lands. But there are only a few backward village peasants there. We can always re-establish the order. Let's go. As long as we can survive, there will surely come a day where we triumph." "Master, why didn't you go with them?" She had separated from the crowd with a group of people and rushed towards the west. Apart from Kraft and her family bodyguards, the majority of the others did not possess any fighting strength. They were all her retainers and servants from the tower. I left some important documents and magic stones inside the experimental lab in the concealing forest. Since we need to re-establish order, these things are essential to the witches. I want to bring them over to the other side of the mountains. The devils have caught up to us. Hammer, Stone, you go obstruct them. Kraft commanded. Yes. She gritted her teeth, proceeding forward with her head lowered. These mortals would only be able to slow down the devils, they were simply unable to defeat these adversaries. Once they went, they would have no further chance to live. However, she had no choice but to abandon them as she needed to reach her destination as soon as possible. For some reason, overlapping black and white spots appeared in the sky. And then her vision blurred. Kraft panted as he followed behind her. Even someone as robust as him would feel very weary after trudging through snowy ground for 3 days. She glanced behind her. The procession of 30 or so people had now dwindled to a mere 6 people. Some people had fled en route, and some seriously injured people had taken the initiative to break away from the group. If the devils were to chase up to them again. Rest assured, Master, you still have me. Kraft appeared to have seen through her thoughts as he comforted her. I will stall them as best I can. Why? He was a little stunned. Why are you so persistent until the end? If you escaped now, maybe you would be able to survive. She asked in bewilderment. We are witches and have always been aloof and distant, while you are just an ordinary person. Under normal circumstances, you wouldn't be thinking of accompanying me to death. But you have never mistreated us. Although I don't have any magic, I still have principles. Protecting you is my duty. As an uproar sounded behind them, everyone understood that their final moments had arrived. Master, go quickly. You mustn't look back. The black and white spots were increasing. She staggered into the basement and organized the data and magic stones that were on the table. Kraft's words gave rise to some confusion for her. Since a long time ago, one belief was spread throughout the holy city. Witches were people chosen by the gods, and the people unable to condense magic were both uneducated and powerless, only cultivating their soil. But from this captain of the imperial bodyguards, she could see valor and tenacity, nothing like the powerlessness people spoke of throughout the population. In fact, they had qualities that witches were unable to achieve. Cooperation between both sides was much better than unilateral command, at least this was the case within her stone tower. That being the case, how did the people from over 400 years ago suffer such a crushing defeat? Suddenly, the bellows of the devils resounded from outside the door. Damn it, they arrived faster than expected. Her vision was blurry and countless spots fluttered before her eyes, practically filling her entire field of view. But she couldn't die here, she had to bring her research results out, past the mountain and across the river, over to the desolate lands to rebuild their social order. She groped around for a magic stone of reverberation and imbued her magic into it, causing it to produce constant cries for help. There was a loud noise and the wooden door split apart. The devils had already broken in. Hoping that someone might hear her cries for help, she circulated all of the magic power in her body and converted it into cold frost, which was then discharged. A mad demon raised its spear, its arms rapidly swelling up. In the next moment, the spearhead flew at her with a cold ray of light. She couldn't help but close her eyes as the black and white spots covered everything and her vision turned pitch black. All the sounds faded as well. Her body no longer felt cold, as though she was wrapped in soft velvet. It seemed like she wasn't in a gloomy basement, but instead lying in a warm meadow. Even the feeling of impalement did not come for a long, long time. Did I die? After some time, a fine slit appeared within the darkness which subsequently grew brighter and brighter. She attempted to open her eyes slowly, and a hazy gray ceiling projected itself in her eyes little by little. She heard someone say, "Your Highness, she has awoken." Chapter 344, Past Events, Part 1. Your Highness? What a queer form of address. It's something you'd only hear in the tales of old. Attempting to move her eyes was a struggle. She tried casting her gaze to the side only to see a gray-haired man enter her field of view, several women standing by his side. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. She didn't reply, asking a question instead, where am I? Border town, Kingdom of Greycastle's Western Territory. Great, she thought. Things currently looked to be developing in the direction she least wanted them to, an unknown location, an unknown time period, and unknown people. She wanted to get up out of bed, but she discovered that she couldn't muster a single iota of strength. I am Roland Wimbledon, the fourth prince of the Kingdom of Greycastle as well as the feudal lord of Border Town, he continued after a short pause. These girls are members of the Witch Union. You. Do you not remember anything? Witch Union. She frowned, so they're witches? I don't know what kind of newfangled organization this is, but at least we're alike. Still. Why do they look like this man's subordinates? Wait, a prince? She thought back for a moment and couldn't help feeling stunned. Wasn't this one of the titles used in the secular regime during the First War of Gods well over 400 years ago? Could it be? Did I return to a time before the start of the Great War? Could the gods have possibly given me another chance to start over, to make preparations, to rescue the holy city and its people? No, calm down, she told herself, this kind of completely illogical affair would only occur in a fictional tavern story. That's right, she thought while trying to recall the scene at the end. There was a horde of mad demons that had charged into the experimental lab's basement and she had discharged all the magic in her body to construct the sturdiest possible ice barrier. A magic stone of reverberation had been set to release distress signals non-stop, awaiting the day they restored their fertile fields and could locate her again. Were you the ones who saved me? There was no mistake, she had already escaped from the ice barrier, so the only possibility was that the witches' army had returned. Have the devils withdrawn already? Have we won? The holy city. What happened to the holy city of Tequila? Having blurted out this series of questions, she saw the faces of the other party change. They looked at one another with expressions of joy and excitement. We really did find you in the basement of a stone tower, said a witch with a mature-looking face and auburn hair. She clearly couldn't stop herself from asking, are you truly someone from 450 years ago? That person reminded her of the miraculous holy warrior who had fought against impossible odds. That woman's hair had also been like this, like a flame igniting everyone's spirit. She was more willing to answer the witch's question than the one the gray-haired man asked. She did not usually care much for social hierarchies, but she nevertheless found being interrogated by someone beneath her somewhat offensive. Had it been her petty master in her place, this man would most likely be severely punished. My name is Agatha, a witch of the Tequila Exploration Society. She paused. What do you mean by 450 years ago? Don't tell me. Have you been fighting with the devils for over 400 years? That's impossible. You've slept for a very long time, things might be a little different from what you imagine, said the man who called himself Roland. If you think it won't be a burden to your body, we can fill you in slowly. Go ahead. Agatha closed her eyes and took a deep breath. This prince behaved very rudely, but she did not have the energy to argue about such matters. As the other party began to detail the history relating to Greycastle and the development of the four great kingdoms of the continent, she felt shivers creep down her spine. She soon discovered a few familiar features in his tale, the concealing forest and the impassable mountain range for example. But when she compared these points with her memories, the conclusion was absolutely shocking. If those places corresponded to the ones in her memories, then those so-called four great kingdoms were part of the desolate lands of the past, a long, narrow area situated between the mountains and the sea that was, in her contemporaries' opinion, a barren place with no development value whatsoever. And the forbidden wastelands he spoke of laid where she remembered the fertile plains to be. Finally, when it came to the holy city of Tequila, it had long become a region no one knew of, buried in the depths of the fertile plains after many, many years. How ridiculous was this? However, there was something to top even that. The status of witches in society had been lost along with Tequila. According to the prince, witches had unexpectedly become the target of opprobrium in the wider society and the regular people had a firm grip on power in the four great kingdoms. All those obsolete playthings from before the First War of Gods will now call themselves kings and lords. Yet it was precisely these antediluvian beings who had become the rulers that dominated the witches. How could this be? Preposterous. She couldn't stop herself objecting, to have witches actually be killed by regular people? Who would be courageous enough to dare do such a thing? Full of indignation, Agatha extended her arm, intending to teach this driveling man a lesson, but to her surprise the magic failed to transform into frost and was not discharged. It was only at this moment that she noticed a metal cuff fastened around her ankle. When she lifted up the quilt she saw there was a stone embedded in the shackle, a god stone of retaliation. Are you guys insane? She looked at the group of witches in disbelief. You would go so far as to help a regular person suppress a high-ranked witch, violating the Federation's prohibition on unauthorized use of a god stone of retaliation. Only the Federation's law enforcement team was allowed to use the god stones. Anybody apart from them who dared to carry, sell, modify, or destroy the god stones would receive the most severe of punishments, up to the death penalty. The prince sighed. This was what I was worried about. Don't worry, I'll go and talk to her. The auburn-haired witch sat at the bedside, covering Agatha's body with the quilt once again. My name is Wendy. You see, things aren't really as you believe them to be. Not only is all he said true. Tequila no longer exists, and I have never heard about the Federation you spoke of either. I don't know what the holy city you lived in 450 years ago was like, but nowadays we witches are always spending our days in hiding. As we have been until we met Prince Roland. He gave us a safe place to stay, encouraged us to use our powers, and at the same time researched ways on how to make use of our abilities to transform the world. Here, we can live completely free, just like a normal person, without the need to hide. Neither do we have to worry about suffering persecution from the church or the masses. You must know that nowadays God's stones of retaliation are everywhere. A witch that loses her powers is no stronger than a normal person. After listening to Wendy's story, Agatha was completely silent. The Federation was a large organization established jointly by several witch kingdoms. It possessed many high-ranked witches and witch extraordinaires. They concentrated their forces in order to win the War of God's will, and the Federation formed a colossal army while incorporating every holy city into the fold at the same time. It was responsible for training and dispatching witches, resolving disputes, and maintaining the stability and public order of the city. Only it had the power to capture and try a witch. Yet somehow an organization that powerful had declined so much that no one knew of its reputation nowadays. Those refugees who wanted to re-establish order, she mused, where are they now? Chapter 345, Bygones, Part 2. Translator, Mes/Trans editor. Elsa was perplexed by the immense changes. She told herself not to believe them, but their stories sounded so real that she thought no witch could have made it up out of blue. Putting herself in their shoes, she could never imagine she was slaved, hunted, or even slaughtered. Even ordinary people with the lowest status in the holy city were treated by witches as human beings instead of animals. She started to feel extremely exhausted. Wendy sensed it and brought her a cup of hot milk and tried to console her. Oh, dear, drink this milk, and you'll feel better. Though the lady with reddish-brown hair didn't have the godlike power and strength, she affected Elsa with her good temperament and manner. Elsa drank the milk in one gulp. A warm and sweet current flew into her gut, which helped her recover a little. Elsa rested for a long period before she continued their conversation. Although she couldn't understand why these witches were wary of her, she knew that she must win their trust first, or they wouldn't help take the fetters off. As for the credibility of what the prince and Wendy said, she had to find out by her own eyes. She wouldn't believe the words that the Holy Union had vanished before she saw the cramped and underdeveloped barbarian land with her own eyes. As I said, my name is Elsa, and I was a member of Tequila Quest Society. In the 30th year of the Battle of Divine Will, Tequila, the last holy city, fell down in the war. Most people went into exile, while I went to the misty forest to fetch things we left there. Wait. Were you fighting against the demons? Asked the prince. Who else could be fighting against them other than us? Elsa frowned. Should we rely on vulnerable humans like you? Were you a witch raised by the church? I never heard of anything about the church. What's it? She said impatiently. Tequila, no, all the holy cities which hosted tens of thousands of people were created by witches. Apart from witches, most of the citizens were ordinary people, like you. They were responsible for reproducing and raising children until their magic power was awakened. And then these young witches would be handed over to another special department to receive education and training. Of course, the witches who were good at fighting would join the union and participate in battles with demons. The prince pondered for a moment, and then took out a book and asked, "Can you read it?" Elsa skimmed several lines and was attracted by the content at once. "This is a diary from a witch." "Did you also write in this way?" a witch with light gray hair asked. This writing system was created by the union and exclusive to witches. In this way, the ordinary human beings would be prevented from participating in important affairs at upper level. But in my opinion, I didn't think this sort of exclusion was a good idea. "How could you prevent ordinary people?" she asked with a great curiosity. Even if witches created another language system, ordinary people could also grasp it through learning, right? "It takes magic power to read it," explained Elsa. "It isn't very difficult. I can teach you since you're a witch. Language is a tool for communication." The prince commented. "The more popular it is, the better." So what the union did was very stupid. The exclusion of ordinary people would only limit the resources available to you. In fact, after training and education, ordinary people are capable of many jobs. Except that they cannot use magic power, they are as good as witches. Although Elsa agreed with him, yet she could hardly accept that an ordinary person criticized the union. She would collaborate with them when necessary, but she couldn't tolerate their finger-pointing. She began to miss Calf, her chief guard. Even though he was only a subordinate to her family, she thought he was more gentle than the so-called prince. "My name is Scroll, Miss Elsa," another witch who looked pretty mature, suddenly asked. "Have you ever heard of the name of Alice?" "How come you know this name?" Elsa suffered a jolt. Wasn't it said that all the records about 450 years ago had been lost? "I found an ancient book in the ruins located in the forest on east border of King City in Grey Castle," said Scroll. "It's the one on your hand. Her name is on the last page written in ordinary people's language." Elsa quickly turned to the last page. After reading the illegible diary, she deeply sighed and fell into silence. A female statue started emerging in Elsa's mind. The lady raised her long sword, with light radiating from her body shining and dazzling all the people's eyes. But finally her figure was fading away, step by step, little by little. In the end it totally dissolved in the darkness. After a long while, she said slowly, "Right, Alice was the queen of the Meteor City as well as one of the 3 chiefs in the Union. She was an extraordinary, or a transcendent. Even among amounts of blessed ones in the Union, she was also the strongest." "A transcendent?" the crowd murmured. "Since these records have been lost, it's natural for you all knowing nothing about it," Elsa said in a serious voice. "The abilities of wives will be enhanced continuously since they awoke and become stable since the day of adulthood. But it isn't the ceiling of their ability growth. Some lucky dogs can step forward and get unbelievable achievements. We often call it the high awakening. In fact, there's no limit for their awakenings, or growth rate. But obvious changes could be observed on the performance of their magic power." Is this ability evolution?" The prince touched the back of his head and muttered. "In total, 4 witches have evolved in the witch union." 4? Elsa was almost choked by that. She asked surprisingly, "How many witches are there in your witch union exactly?" The prince counted with the help of fingers and said, "More than 10. "Stop talking nonsense." Elsa obviously seemed to be enraged by his rash words. "Do you mean 4 out of 10 have undergone the high awakening? You have no idea what evolution means for witches. It's totally different from the consolidation or derivative skills on the day of adulthood. Only the luckiest ones can be promoted, which takes both perspiration and inspiration." The prince looked rather innocent and gestured to Anna. "What a pretty and elegant girl," Elsa said to herself as she watched the girl walk towards her bed. She was extraordinarily good-looking even among all the witches. Her beautiful blue eyes seemed like a lucid lake, where Elsa could see her own reflections. But she was too young and maybe just had her adulthood. It was impossible for her to accumulate enough experience in training, meditation, and enlightening. Elsa evolved at 26 years old. At that time, she was treated as the most promising genius in the Union for her achievement. She knew how difficult the evolution was since she went through that. They probably take derivative skills a young witch developed on her day of adulthood as a high awakening, Elsa said to herself. A ball of orange fire appeared in Anna's palm. It's the ability to control the flame, a common type of the summoning capabilities, which can be ranked by the maximum temperature and the heating rate. She gave her comments quickly. The one who can eject the flame are regarded as a combat witch. Just after Elsa's words, the blaze dimmed away, and then turned into a tongue of fluorescent green flame. It began to change its color, from dark green to light green. It seemed that the green flame tried to absorb all the lights around so that it could become stronger and stronger. This is the consolidated skill she mastered on the day of adulthood, and you'll see her most important skill soon, the prince explained. Is it? No, it can't be a consolidated skill. If it were, the flame should be hotter and the heart of the flame should be bigger and brighter. Elsa was astonished with her mouth wide open. Besides, what's her most important skill? Soon something incredible happened. The green flame suddenly disappeared, and a black solid cube emerged in Anna's palm, which looked like a piece of rigid metal with smooth facets and angular sides. Chapter 346, Bygones, Part 3. Well, does this count as high awakening? Asked the prince. Elsa didn't know what to say for a moment. What was left in her brain was, how could this be? The holy city had been forgotten, and the Union had been destroyed. There was nowhere for the witches to receive training and guidance, so it was only logical that the witches' abilities declined. But what did she just see? A newly matured witch had received 2 promotions. This couldn't be explained by luck. After all, even in the Union, the home of geniuses, a witch like this was still very rare. Furthermore, if she heard correctly, serve her right is only for memory, not for eyes or ears. There were 3 more of them who were equally talented as Anna? Elsa stared at the man with gray hair motionlessly. It was some time before she could recover. This should count as high awakening, but I don't have the stone of measuring, so I can't measure her change in skill. She paused, her throat feeling dry. I want to ask, if I may, what did Anna experience during her awakening? She seemed to have come of age not long ago. Could these 2 awakenings have happened in only the past 1 or 2 years? It was not until she finished talking that she realized she had used honorifics. The status of a witch couldn't be inherited. Even if a great number of common people were put together, there was no guarantee a capable witch would come out of them. Thus, a witch's level was usually decided based on capability instead of origin. According to Anna's ability, she was already qualified to be a high-level member of the Union. Compared to herself, Elsa felt that Anna was at least her equal, if not her superior. Any awakened senior was worthy of respect. My first awakening happened after I exhausted my magic power while fighting against demonic beasts. As to the second awakening, I think it was caused by my learning of knowledge. Knowledge, she was startled, what kind of knowledge? Ahem, this can be discussed later, the prince cleared his throat. Now let's get back to the topic we were discussing earlier. What do Alice and Experiment of God's Punishment Army exactly mean? Indeed, if he wasn't lying to me, this knowledge must contain something extraordinary in itself. That was why Anna could awaken a new ability through epiphany. So it's understandable that he didn't want to elaborate on it before he could trust me. Elsa could not help but feel excited. Enhancing the chance of evolution had extraordinary significance toward witches. If she could figure out its mechanism, reviving the Union wouldn't be impossible. Then again, where did he acquire this knowledge from? This place is but a barbarian land. How could a bunch of peasants like him understand the secrets of magic power? She was full of confusion. What had the world become in these 400 years? Elsa put those intractable problems aside for the time being. Alice was very powerful. With the help of God's stone of retaliation, she wouldn't be defeated even faced with several lords of hell. However, there were too few transcendents. Put differently, the lack of diversity in our ability led to our defeat. Diversity? That's right. A witch wouldn't know what kind of ability she would have before awakening. But according to the Union's calculation, only 10% of all the witches were fit for combat. The same ratio could be applied to extraordinary witches. As to what the ratio was of combat witches that were actually promoted, no one knew. There was a period of time when not a single witch was promoted within 50 years. Thus, actually the fighting ability of the Union was very unstable. So mortals may necessarily awaken, the awakened may not be good at combat, and combat experience doesn't necessarily lead to capability. Is this what you mean? The prince said with one hand fumbling his chin. That's about right, Elsa sighed. We formed a guard platoon composed of mortals to compensate for the witches' number shortage, but mortals could not defeat demons. Even equipped with God's stones of retaliation, they were still far from being able to fight against the mighty mad demon. Under this unfavorable situation, Alice ordered the Quest Society to research warriors that could break through the limits of the human body. Judging from this scrawled note, it seemed that she had succeeded. Seemed, the prince said in curiosity. Didn't you say that you were a member of the Quest Society? Indeed. But ever since the order was issued, I left the Tequila Quest Society and began to build my own lab in the misty forest. She bit her lips and hesitated for a moment before proceeding. They quickly found the solution, which was to unite witches and mortals by force with the help of God's stone of retaliation, but this process required them to consume the witches' lives. I couldn't accept this approach. I believed that the Quest Society should focus on exploring the use of God's stone of retaliation, rather than using witches as consumable resources. What's written on the note is right. This behavior would only bring destruction to witches. The prince looked a bit shocked. Using witches as consumable resources? Alice did this out of helplessness. At that time Tequila was on the verge of destruction. Elsa felt the prince somehow looked a bit pleasing to the eye when she saw that he showed an expression of sympathy. But now the Union has vanished into thin air, it proves that this approach wasn't able to proceed, and probably won't ever appear again. After she finished talking, she bowed her head and fumbled the book with her hands. Climb over the mountains, wade through the waters, how familiar the slogans were. Yet where are you now? How could I possibly revive the order all by myself? But God's punishment army is still there. Upon hearing this, Elsa's fumbling fingers suddenly froze. She looked at the prince with disbelief. What did you just say? I am not sure whether this is a mere coincidence, the other said very slowly, as if he was looking for the appropriate wording. The church, the organization you've never heard of, established 2 cities at the grand opening in the middle of the impassable mountain range. Those cities were named holy cities. The hunting of witches was also initiated by them. What's more, they also searched for orphans and street urchins, and brought them back to the monastery of the holy city. Wendy was one of them who had escaped. The church had its own army and territory. Its most powerful warriors were from the God's punishment army. Those monsters who had lost their sanity had infinite strength and were almost as mighty as extraordinary witches. And their numbers were absolutely not few. Apart from that, they might even have owned a number of powerful witches, which is why I temporarily sealed your ability with the God's locket of retribution. The prince laid out his hands. Prior to what you told us, we had always thought that it was the church who established the holy city of Tequila, fought against the demons, and left the ruins. Elsa opened her mouth but was unable to utter a word. How could it be that an organization composed of mortals took away the most important secrets of the Union, hunted witches in return, and built God's punishment army to consolidate its rule? She suddenly had a splitting headache. So God's punishment army didn't vanish, but fell into the hands of an organization that hates witches. What on earth did the members of the Union do? Wendy must have sensed her exhaustion and discomfort, because she gently pushed Elsa down onto the bed, and said in a low voice, "Let's call it a day. Have a good night's sleep. Rest assured that we will find out the reason." Then, she felt something loosened from her ankle. The god's locket of retribution was taken off by Anna. The crowd left the room one by one, and the gray-haired prince was the last. As the door being closed behind him, Elsa heard some calm, steady words. Chapter 347, Confusions. How is she? Roland asked. Roland put down the pen, looking up at Nightingale, who had just quietly appeared in his office. She's fallen asleep. Before that, she had a bowl of oatmeal. It seems that she had a good appetite. Nightingale went to the table and sat back in her old place. Now it's Silvio's turn to guard her. Well, that's not bad. Do you believe what she said? Nightingale asked. With the god's stone of retaliation being removed, you can easily judge if she is lying when you question her tomorrow, but, Roland paused for a moment, I think most of what she said is true. Why do you think so? She asked curiously. Have you noticed that as a person from 400 years ago, she's using the same diction and language as us? The prince said with his hands propping up his chin. Theoretically, such a situation would be almost impossible for two territories separated by the impassable mountain range, unless these two territories were of the same origin and had frequent contact. But she called the Four Kingdoms the barbarian land. That's the point. I don't know what the scene was like 400 years ago. Perhaps all this used to be was just a few scattered villages and some criminals exiled by the world of witches. The kingdom's history book also records that the age of the major cities was generally between 200 and 300 years, and astrologers also came into existence during that era, he said with great interest. It had always bewildered me that the astrologers, who generally had no achievements nor research findings, were also called sages, the same as alchemists. Now I think I've got my answer. The Union fled to this borderland, and brought with them the survivors, their language and civilization. These people mingled with the locals, and helped the latter build the regime, fortress, and city. You speak as if you'd seen it happening. Nightingale shook her head, smiling. This is the only way we can explain why we're using the same language as her, Roland said earnestly, because we're of the same origin. And during these 400 years, civilization was constantly in the process of rebuilding without the slightest opportunity of advancing past where it used to be. All right, she said with her hands laid out, anyway, you'll know the answer by tomorrow, and if your guess is wrong, then you'll have to give me a luxury lunch. The so-called luxury lunch was composed of corn soup, roast chicken drumstick and ice cream bread and was usually only served once a week. What if you're wrong? Whatever you want, said Nightingale, tilting her head and squinting. The perfect curve formed by her cheek and smooth neck was exceptionally beautiful. Regardless of what kind of movement an attractive person makes, it will always look seductive. Roland finally believed this saying. I will bear that in mind, he said with two coughs, turning his attention back to his notebook. Since Elsa had only recently awakened after 4 decades of sleep, Roland didn't want to press her to give accurate and detailed answers to all his questions. For the most part, his questions followed her train of thought, and the information he gained was quite disordered as a result. What he was doing at the moment was to rearrange the information he gleaned from Elsa, and to find out the key points he had to know next. Undoubtedly, the most pressing problem was about the demons. What was the cause of the war with the demons, and why did the demons cease fighting? This information was essential to Border Town. No war could have been started without a reason, but the demons' behavior didn't seem like an attack motivated by resources or expansion. They didn't occupy the barbarian land, nor did they pillage mankind. What they did seemed like an act purely for the joy of slaughter. Roland also noticed that Elsa mentioned the term battle of divine will. Could it be that the two sides waged the dreadful war under the will of God? But at that time, the church hadn't come into being, so there wasn't the one and only God that the church declared. Without this explained, his mind remained unsettled. Meanwhile, he needed to figure out the basic necessities of life in the Holy City's civilization as soon as possible, or in other words, assess its degree of economic and civil development. He needed this information to measure the level of this civilization and deduce the demon's capabilities. As for the Union, Roland wasn't too concerned about it. Its witches were scarce and their abilities were unstable. This organization's capability for organized combat wouldn't be very high. Historical experience had repeatedly stressed that before the formation of a generation gap, a comprehensive war was all about attrition. A few sophisticated weapons wouldn't reverse the overall disadvantage. The second question was about the magic stone. Considering what Tilly said, the magical nature of such stones could greatly compensate for the witches' unstable ability, enabling the witches to exert powers that didn't belong to them. In this way, even auxiliary witches could be sent to war. However, in Roland's point of view, that was like putting the cart before the horse. He'd rather turn all the combat witches into auxiliary witches and put them all to work in production roles. Oddly enough, the Union, which had large numbers of witches, didn't make use of magic stones to fight against the demons. Instead, it chose to produce God's punishment army, which in Roland's view was beyond comprehension. Maybe the magic stone had some unknown shortcomings, or its production was extremely difficult? Fortunately, Elsa was a member of the Quest Society, an organization similar to the current Alchemy Workshop, which gathered a group of highly talented witches specializing in the research of magic stones and magic power. Roland faintly felt that there must be a wealth of potential information to be exploited. The last question was about the church. He drew a circle on this column. Obviously, he couldn't count on getting details from Elsa about the organization's foundation and development. What he could infer from the scattered information at hand was that the church was founded after the witches' defeat. After obtaining the Union's secret, the church concealed everything about the witches and declared them as incarnations of demons. If the people of the Four Kingdoms were seen as descendants of Aborigines, the church would be a veritable outsider. Since the Aborigines didn't have their own civilization, they could be easily fooled by fabricated history and prophecies. Was it only because the witches used to suppress ordinary people that the refugees took the witches as their enemy and went on to hunt the witches on this continent? Roland frowned. All these deductions did sound reasonable, yet, he felt that there was something wrong. The Union had a great number of bliss warriors, extraordinary witches, and even transcendents. Even if the church managed to get a hold of God's stones of retaliation, was it possible for them to defeat an opponent like the Union? To wipe out a much stronger force, you couldn't purely rely on hatred. Clearly there was some key information missing. That witch seems to dislike you, Nightingale suddenly said. After all, she used to live in a world where the witches were considered superior to the human being. Roland laughed. I'm afraid I'm just no different from the roadside weeds in her eyes. Don't you hate her? Why would I? She is nothing but a poor woman abandoned by her own time. He shook his head. She'd been sleeping in the frozen coffin for 400 years, and woke up to find the world had completely changed. The strangeness brought by the new world would bring her fear, so it was no surprise that she would build a defensive wall in her heart. After she accepts all this, she will probably gradually change her point of view. What a typical response of yours, said Nightingale with a smile. But rest assured, I won't allow her to offend you in any way. Chapter 348, Mortals and Extraordinaries. When Elsa woke up again, she was alone in the room. The thick curtains were tightly closed, making the room extremely quiet. Probably considering the fact that she wasn't familiar with the environment, someone put a candle beside the front of the bed, which was quietly burning with orange flames. Elsa turned her head and watched it for a long time, only to find that there wasn't a single drop of wax overflowing. The candle seemed to be burning forever without any change in the length. It may be caused by magic, she thought. The quilt was so soft that it was probably made of high-quality cotton and filled with light and warm fluff. The treatment was as good as that in the holy city of Tequila, which made it hard for Elsa to believe that there could be such comfortable beds and bedrooms in barbarian land. She moved her fingers and found that she had recovered most of her physical strength. Elsa rolled out of bed. She drove her power, and chill overflowed from her fingers immediately. It seems that the prince didn't play any tricks. He had God's stone of retaliation removed to give me a certain degree of freedom. She went to the window and opened a bit of the curtains. It was totally dark outside. Stars couldn't been seen, so did the moon. The whole earth seemed to be swallowed by darkness with only a few hazy flares shaking so far away. She could hear the wind roaring outside next to the window, and could occasionally see some snow falling on the glass. It seemed to be winter now, which was a good season for the awakening of witches. In Tequila, this kind of evening didn't even exist since the whole city would celebrate every day of winter. Bonfires burned throughout the night on the street. When she overlooked the city on the tower, it seemed to be lit by flares shining like stars, which symbolized hope and a promising future. People prayed around the campfires, eager to gather magic power and surmount the mortal world. Whenever a witch awakened, the fate of her family changed as well. They don't need to worry about food or clothing anymore. Elsa pulled up the bolt and opened the window. The cold wind suddenly swept into the room and blew the curtains away. The candles in the house were snuffed out as well. The room suddenly was plunged into darkness. When her eyes became adapted to the changes of light, she could see the faint white light reflected by the accumulated snow on the roof of the town. Judging from the silhouette of the buildings, this place isn't very big indeed, and is identical with the border town mentioned by the prince. Ordinary people would be frozen after a few hours if they stayed outside in such cold weather. But Elsa wasn't afraid of the cold since her body would automatically expel the slightest chill that made her uncomfortable. The last time she felt cold was before her awakening. But now, she had almost forgotten the feeling. The earlier conversation was lingering in Elsa's mind as long as she closed her eyes. The union died and the witch became the devil's minions. Hence mortals were recklessly hunting witches with the help of God's stones of retaliation. According to the diary, Alice and Natalia successfully fled from the fertile plains. But if they failed to stop everything, the union was doomed. What on earth happened at that time? Why were the two transcendents defeated by mortals? She was reluctant to think about that anymore. "Aren't you cold?" someone behind her suddenly asked. Elsa was shocked. She turned back and saw a girl sitting by the bed in the dark. Her face was completely hidden in the night. She was like a ghost that appeared quietly. The door was closed at that time, but Elsa didn't hear any footsteps before she came in. "If you can close the window, I don't mind relighting the candle," she said again. There was no doubt that the girl was a witch. "But it's late in the midnight. What's she up to?" Elsa nodded without any word. She closed the window and secretly let the thin yet hard ice cover her skin. The girl didn't do anything dangerous. Instead, she opened the first drawer of the night table from which she took out a flint to light the candle. In the candlelight, Elsa saw her. She had beautiful golden curls and slender eyebrows which made her eyes look very sharp. Elsa hadn't seen her before. "Nice to meet you." "Oops. It's the second time that we meet," she raised her lips and said, "My name is Nightingale." Did she mean that she also hid in the crowd before? "Is this your ability?" Elsa frowned and asked, "Are you also the High Awakened?" Even if she was one of the honorable High Awakened, it was still impolite of her to break in without knocking at the door. "Ah, you are talking about evolution." Nightingale shook her head. "I'm not that smart like Anna. She finished the book called The Theory of Natural Balabala in a short time. My head is going to explode once I see those formulas and theorems. Maybe I don't have the luck to evolve in this life." Elsa was absent-minded for a short period because she couldn't understand half of what the girl said. Honestly, she didn't expect that an original witch could say something like that. Besides, according to her facial expressions, the girl didn't seem to deliberately tease herself. "Is that what the prince called knowledge? As for the book you mentioned, can I read it?" "Of course. You may read it as long as you join the Witch Union and be loyal to His Highness." She shrugged her shoulders. "To serve a mortal?" Elsa stared at her and said in a low voice after a while, "I thought I was weird enough, but you are crazier than me." "Weird? Crazy?" Nightingale tilted her head and asked, "Why would you say that?" In the holy city of Tequila, most of the awakened witches only treat ordinary people who couldn't gather magic as humble servants, inferior people, or fertility tools. She said slowly, "But I didn't think so. Even though they were stupid, they weren't hopeless. Those people were no different from witches in many aspects as long as they were taught to learn and think. Because of that, many people thought that I was so weird that I had allocated part of the business in the tower to mortals. However, I didn't expect that you are crazier than me since you are loyal to a mortal and take orders from him. His Highness Roland didn't consider us as servants. Nightingale twitched her mouth and said, I don't know what kind of strange idea you have on the word of loyalty, but the fact is that he took in the witches oppressed by the church, gave us new power, and let us live together with his subjects in Western region. We are united to fight against the church and demonic beasts, as well as against the demons in the future. But this model was proved to be a failure. Elsa couldn't help raising her voice. 400 years ago, for you, it might be 800 or 900 years ago, the world was ruled by both mortals and witches. At that time, human beings lived almost throughout the entire Dawn region. However, when demons attacked, we suffered such a big defeat that we only managed to keep the fertile plains. Oh? She raised her eyebrows. Was that true? You said the history had been buried for 400 or 500 years, Elsa continued. According to the Union's records, the third battle of divine will is about to break out very soon, yet you have no idea of demons. The east of barbarian land is swirling sea. So where else can you retreat? Only by rebuilding the Union, uniting witches, and improving the probability of high awakening with knowledge can we seize the final chance to stop demons' attack. Why do you have to say that? What do you mean? 400 years have passed, right? A lot of things could be changed in such a long time. But why are you still restrained by those old ideas? Nightingale sighed. His Highness said that mortals could defeat demons when he left. You heard that as well. He is also uniting all the people, including witches. He wants to unite every ordinary person on the continent, because he told me that people across the land are the most powerful group. Wasteland. Elsa was about to refute this nonsense when she suddenly paused. The girl is so certain that she seems to know the result in advance. Could 400 years really change everything? Does that prince with gray hair really have such incredible ability to let mortals have the same power as witches? You seem to have realized that. Nightingale smiled and said, we still have a lot of time, so why not open your heart and to see with your own eyes? This time Elsa was silent for a long time. I can see that you don't like me. Nightingale didn't retort. The witches of the Quest Association used to see me like that as well, after they knew that I had appointed a group of mortals as experimental assistants in the tower, she said. Obviously, you don't like me, but why do you tell me these? I don't hate you as long as you stop being so arrogant and treat His Highness normally. As for your question, she paused and continued, because the prince said he didn't want to see you abandoned by the times. Chapter 349, Passing On, Part 1. Standing on the top floor of the Tower of Babel, Maine peered through the window towards the snow-covered city of Hermes. Since the last attack by a large group of demonic beasts on New Holy City, peace temporarily returned to the icy plains, and the fall of snow weakened. The citizens of Hermes were able to enjoy an unlikely, but timely respite. Even though this was supposed to be a time of happiness and celebration, Maine continued to feel nothing but emptiness in his heart. During the attack, in order to kill the terrifyingly large, hybrid, demonic beasts, a platoon of warriors from God's punishment army dashed out from the side entrance of the city wall and fought them head-on. In total, 19 warriors were wounded and 2 were killed. As for the 2 beasts, they laid on the ground, growling for a long time after the warriors hacked off their limbs. Eventually, the city wall's guards killed them with spears. Rather than the loss of the warriors, it was the timing of the demonic beast's attack that terrified Maine. After remaining silent for some time, he let out a long sigh and returned to his seat beside the table. He wanted to flip open the canon and read through it carefully one more time. Even if you flip the book until it breaks, the result isn't going to change. Tayfun said as he walked into the circular room holding 2 hot drinks, and placed one in front of Maine. His Holiness O'Brien hasn't agreed to meet you. I've sent my request to the pivotal secret area 3 times already, but there's still no reply. Maine said anxiously. And I have no idea what His Holiness is up to at such an important time. Don't worry, Taifun interjected, as you've said yourself, the canon was written by the first pope, and hence there are bound to be mistakes. After more than 400 years, who can guarantee that everything in the book is accurate? But this time it's different. The archbishop shook his head. If the time is miscalculated, it'll be a serious catastrophe for us. We're investing a lot of strength and energy in unifying the kingdom to gather all the power of the mainland against the demons. But, if the time is shortened by half, we have no way to build up God's punishment army sufficiently after the war. Quiet, Lord Main. The old bishop laughed and slowly sipped on his hot drink. What's done cannot be undone. We can't change the fact that Fong of Hell appeared before us. But there might be 2 reasons for this. What reasons? Drink first and I'll speak, Taifun said, stroking his beard. Main picked up his cup. It looked like goat milk at first, but when he brought it closer, a spicy smell rushed into his nose. What did you put in it? Coltsfoot. Taifun tilted his mouth. Although you aren't able to directly drink dreamland water, drinking a bit of this will be beneficial for you. It'll help you to release your tensions, soothe your nerves, and sleep easier. With one gulp, Main emptied the cup and soon felt a fierce burning sensation in his throat. Although the savory taste of the goat milk was supposed to dilute the coltsfoot juice, it was still extremely uncomfortable for someone who did not consume such drinks often. He coughed twice, wiped his mouth, and said, even a cup of dreamland water wouldn't make me fall asleep. Can you speak now? One possibility is that the Pope made a mistake in writing. Old men get dizzy spells and moments of amnesia very often, as I know very well. Taifun shrugged. That's unlikely. Main frowned. This concerns the layout and arrangement of the church, and more importantly, determines the destiny of man. I'm sure he took great care in writing this down. What's the second reason? The second possibility is that there are circumstances we don't know about that have changed everything. The archbishop waited for a moment, and upon realizing that the old bishop had no intention to continue speaking, he questioned, that's it? Well, that's it. Taifun repeated. Is this a joke? Everything changed? For this simple reason, all of our efforts will go down the drain. How can you be so cursory? Lord Main. Taifun raised his voice a few notches. What exactly do you insist on getting? Is it a surefire way to defeat the demons? Or do you think that you're the only person who wants to defend Hermes and prevent the demons from entering the icy plains? Main froze. In any battle, everyone wants to win. But so far, we can't even assure victory in every battle against the 4 kingdoms, not to mention the demons from hell. Speaking in a louder voice, he said, have you forgotten the Supreme Pontiff's teachings? The consequences of overinsistence and fear aren't too different. What you should do is accept reality and take things step by step till the end. The eventual result isn't for us to control. Fear of the result. Main's heart palpitated. He's right, I'm indeed afraid. Afraid that after becoming the Pope, I'll be unable to fend off the demons, and watch the death of mankind under my charge. I used to be like you. Taifun suddenly lowered his voice, but Heather's death made me understand that the result is often unpredictable. The months of demons came earlier than usual without warning, yet we were still able to capture Wolfheart City before the big snowfall, as planned, but Heather died and the nature of the war changed. Even so, we still have to carry on. He stood up and let out a long sigh, then patted Main on the shoulder and walked out of the room. So, whether for 5 or 10 years, you must be unrelenting in your mission, not for the path of certain victory, but to fulfill your duty even if the result turns out to be not what you desired. After hearing the door closing, Main gazed at the empty cup in front of him and remained silent. He had to admit that Taifun's words were reasonable, but now that he was about to shoulder this heavy responsibility, how could he not feel afraid? Suddenly, a presiding judge walked into the room. Lord Main, the Supreme Pontiff wishes to see you. Finally. He stood up immediately, and said eagerly, take me quickly to the pivotal secret area. Hidden deep beneath a plateau, the pivotal secret area was a cold and quiet place. Walking into the hall of the pivotal secret temple, Maine seemed slightly dazed. Although there was no incarnation ceremony arranged for the day, all of the candles in the hall were lit up and the resultant candlelight sketched out an orange-yellow silhouette for the hall. The overhead chandelier seemed like a gathering of stars in the kingdom of God. His Holiness O'Brien was sat on the throne, silently gazing at Maine. Maine felt something was not right, but suppressed his suspicions, and walked up to the throne. He knelt prostrate with his forehead touching the floor. "Rise, child." The Pope's voice was very delicate, and without paying attention it would be difficult to hear what he was saying. Maine straightened his body, and saw that the Pope's face was ridden with age and fatigue, as if he had not had a rest for a long time. "Your Holiness, please take care of your body." "No need." He laughed, and deep wrinkle lines covered his face at once. "I'm going to die soon." "Your Holiness, you aren't." "No, listen to me, child." O'Brien labored to interrupt the bishop. "I understand the condition of my own body, and without question, my time is soon up." He paused for a moment and took a deep breath. "The purpose of calling you here today is to pass on the Pope's position to you." Chapter 350, Passing On, Part 2. Maine froze and stared at the old man in front of him, hoping to see something in his eyes. But he saw nothing other than lifelessness. The Pope's eyes were no longer as penetrating and authoritative as they used to be. Perhaps, he still possessed the wisdom passed down from previous popes, as well as the knowledge obtained from the canon, but nothing escaped time. His Holiness wasn't kidding, Maine realized. His journey was reaching its end. Maine's eyes started to blur. He knelt once again, with his forehead touching the floor. This time, His Holiness did not ask him to stand up, but instead waited until he completed the entire action before saying, "Follow me." The attending guards helped the Pope onto a cart and wheeled him towards the gate of the pivotal secret area. Maine followed closely behind, and the party left the pivotal secret temple, turning into a long and narrow tunnel. On the smooth stone walls of the tunnel was embedded a luminous crystal at every 10 steps distance. Looking down the tunnel, one couldn't see the end. After walking for a long time, Maine finally left the tunnel and entered a well-lit room. Beneath his feet, the floor had turned into flat slabs, and he was able to see the edges and corners of the walls, as well as the chandelier that hung from the ceiling. Apparently, the tunnel had led into an underground chamber. "We're underneath the cathedral of the old holy city." Perceiving Maine's bewilderment, the Pope clarified. "The design of this place is identical to the cathedral, except that it is built upside down. I call it the Reflection Church." "Underneath the cathedral?" Maine exclaimed. "I never expected there to be a basement." "It's not a basement indeed, because the two aren't mutually accessible." O'Brien smiled. "This place is only accessible through the underground tunnel of the pivotal secret area. The roof is made of an extremely thick mixture of slab and clay, which is impossible to break through using conventional methods." "Why, is such a design necessary?" "To guard a secret, without completely burying it," he replied. "Before a pope ascends the throne, he must come to the Reflection Church to witness the establishment, development and expansion of the church, and at the same time, learn by heart the goals of the church." "To defeat the demons," Maine said solemnly. O'Brien did not nod in agreement, but instead said softly, "No, child. To win the smile of God." The Archbishop was briefly at a loss. "What?" This time, the Pope did not respond, but instead commanded the guards to continue moving forward. According to the direction of the stairway and the ramp, they were moving upwards. Soon, the party arrived in front of a grand hall. By recognizing the designs in the surroundings that he was familiar with, Maine identified the place as the prayer room of the Reflection Church. The thick wooden door of the room was pushed open with a creaking sound. Although it seemed that the Pope had not visited this hall for a long time, there wasn't a smell of dust. Evidently, someone had been keeping this place clean at all times. "They're only allowed to send me thus far. From here on, you'll have to push me into the room," O'Brien said. "Yes, Your Holiness." Maine took the cart handles and pushed the Pope into the prayer room. Closing the wooden door behind him, the room no longer received light from the torches outside. Now, the only light remaining in the room was the soft radiance of the yellow crystals. Similar to the arrangement in the tunnel, the crystals were embedded evenly on the walls of two sides of the room. However, a notable difference was that above each crystal hung a large portrait. Mayne vaguely remembered that the positions of the portrait frames were where the windows of the prayer room above ground went. The portrait's contents were much the same. They were half-body portraits of people wearing magnificent gowns, looking full of energy, with their eyes seemingly fixed upon anyone who entered the prayer room. Mayne was astonished when he found His Holiness O'Brien's portrait among them. The drawing looked exactly like the real person, and stared at Mayne with a smile on his face. A strange feeling caused Mayne to shudder uncontrollably, and goose-bumps covered his back. "Ah, you found me." The Pope seemed to sense the bishop's change of emotion. "This portrait was completed half a year ago. At that time I didn't look quite as old as I do now, and hence it's relatively good-looking. By right, the portrait should only be hung up after my death." He observed the portrait carefully. "Blame it on my impatience, for I wanted to see how I looked on the portrait earlier than I should." "Your Holiness, these are..." Mayne felt his throat turn dry. "Yes, they're the noble pioneers, the supreme pontiffs of old," O'Brien said softly. "Let's continue moving forward, and I'll introduce them to you." The Archbishop listened to His Highness' descriptions, while at the same time studied the portraits, even though he understood that they were the former leaders of the church, but an inexplicable strange feeling continued to linger in his mind. The persons in the portraits were simply too lifelike, and Mayne was unable to imagine what techniques and dyes were used by the artist to produce these half-body portraits. Under the dim yellow light, the top half of the portraits gradually faded into the darkness as Mayne walked further, leaving visible only the lower section of the faces which continued to grin at him. Halfway through the grand hall, Mayne unexpectedly noticed the portraits of women. Their looks were dissimilar and they were dressed differently, but each of them could be said to be movingly beautiful. It was rare for mortals to have such remarkable appearances, as the bishop well knew, and it was for this reason that he felt extremely puzzled and astounded. However, His Highness seemed unconcerned, and continued to calmly introduce their names, terms of service, and contributions. Each of these people was a former pope of the church. The two men soon reached the end of the prayer room. Facing the central aisle of the grand hall was a full-body portrait which occupied an entire wall on its own. It was hung behind the sanctuary, and its four sides were decorated with shiny crystals, which made the picture look even more vivid. Mayne swallowed hard and walked up to the portrait. At the very instant he managed to get a full view of the painting, he felt his heart leap up. "Oh holy, a woman of peerless beauty." Aside from these words, there was no other way for him to describe what he saw. From her looks, she possessed both feminine beauty and masculine fortitude, which blended naturally and did not conflict with each other. Her red hair seemed like streaks of burning flame, while she wielded a large sword which looked wanton and capable of extinguishing all fires and evil desires. She stood erect holding the sword, with her eyebrows slightly raised, both eyes glancing forward, her slender lips firmly closed, and looked naturally powerful and imposing. Under the gaze of her sharp and penetrating pupils, Mayne felt an immense and overwhelming pressure which almost coerced him to kneel in front of this magnificent lady. "Your Holiness, this is..." He struggled to turn his head, only to find that O'Brien had already knelt down. "She's Alice, the first pope and a transcendent. She also has a nickname, the Queen of Witches." Mayne felt his heart jump violently. His earlier speculations had turned out to be absolutely correct. The first popes of the church were witches. Why was the founder of the church a witch? "Kneel and pay respect, child. I'll let you see everything that you wish to know later." Chapter 351, Illusions, Part 1. After Mayne paid his respects, he carried the Pope back onto the cart. "Zero," O'Brien gasped and called softly. A pure witch dressed in white entered the room through a small side door, taking light footsteps which were barely audible. "I'm here." The Archbishop frowned. He did not expect the presence of a pure witch in such a secret place. Even though they were single-handedly raised by the Pope after their awakenings, and served His Holiness for life. These women are, after all, witches. Furthermore, he felt a little unhappy that this person seemed to know about the Reflection Church earlier than he did. Take him to the illusion room. Yes. She walked up to the sanctuary and pressed down the stone-carved cannon on the table. A magical light flashed and the giant portrait started to rise upward slowly, revealing a black metal gate. Then, Zero took the crystal pendant off the Pope's neck, inserted it into the door lock and twisted. A clicking sound was heard from inside the iron gate, and it started to open outwards. She pulled out the crystal pendant, but instead of returning it to His Holiness O'Brien, she placed it in Main's hand. The Archbishop turned his head back to look at the Pope, and the latter nodded his head. Take it. You'll keep it from now on. You may use it to open the library of the pivotal secret temple, or the secret door of the research office. Let's go. Zero smiled and took Main by the hand. They walked together into the room behind the giant portrait. It was probably no longer the church in the same position above ground, and there was nothing in the room except for a floor-to-ceiling window which faced the highlands of Hermes. The room looked very spacious and was formed in a circular structure. It was approximately half the size of the prayer hall and could accommodate rows of 10 people standing side by side, such that it was difficult to associate it with the name secret room. However, within this space, there was no furniture. The only place to sit down was a stone bench that extended along one of the room's curved walls. After the metal door was closed, Main threw off the hand of the pure witch and asked, "Did His Highness allow you to enter?" Zero dismissed his question. "If I don't come with you, who's going to activate the Stone of Illusion? It's not like you have driving power." Her rude response made Main's heart skip a beat. It seems that she still regards herself as His Holiness O'Brien's witch. After I receive the scepter and take control of the church's domain, I must absolutely let her understand that she shouldn't only respect the Pope, but also the Archbishop who is heirship. Then let's start. He held back the emotions that triggered in his heart and sat down on the stone bench. Yes, Your Highness. Zero lifted open a dark panel on the wall, and pressed the magic stone with her hands. But please be prepared, for this is the first time I'm activating this thing. The first time? Hasn't she lived for over 200 years? Didn't she participate in the previous papal handover ceremonies? Main felt a little puzzled, but before he had any time to dwell on it, a dazzling ray of light flashed by and he found himself covered in darkness. The darkness was so complete that there was virtually no light at all, causing the walls, floor, and the stone bench to disappear from sight. Main felt as if he was swallowed by a giant beast from the abyss and suddenly lost all concept of distance. The sky and the earth seemed to merge into one entity, and all he could see was darkness. Lowering his head, he realized that he could not even see his body. Holding his breath, he cautiously reached his hand down and touched the stone bench which remained underneath him. Stamping with his feet, he realized that the floor was also in place. These allowed him to feel a little relieved. Hence, it was fair for Main to believe that he had not been transferred into a new underground chamber, but simply that the magic stone had absorbed all the light in the room. However, under this darkness, how is it possible to witness the truth that His Highness mentioned? As if responding to Main's question, the floor started to brighten again, but it was obvious that this no longer the same secret room. The slabs on the floor were polished until they were glossy and slick, reflected a dark blue sheen, and on every one of them was carved various elaborate and exquisite patterns. Soon, rays of light streaked down from overhead, and Main was astonished to see a transparent skylight appearing on the roof. Peering through the skylight, he was even able to see the clear sky and clouds. In a short while, more furnishings appeared within the room. A marble round table was surrounded by chairs, with a globe and glass cups placed on top. The four walls were curtained. An ornamental sword and shield were erected in the middle of the room. A megacerop's head hung from the top of the doorway. What followed were shadows of people. Main watched in disbelief as lifelike figures of women appeared one by one in the room. Each of them was wearing a magnificent robe, and they sat around the table. Sat facing the gate of the hall was none other than the leader of all, the red-haired Queen of Witches. Her hands drooped and folded in front of her, with her head raised and her chest out. Her eyes looked directly forward while the other women's eyes focused on her. To Maine, all of these seemed like an extremely realistic painting. Was this what the illusion in Illusion Room represented? Maine mused. The illusion before his eyes was perfectly identical to a real scene, such that for a moment, the women seemed to come alive. Everyone, the experiment of God's punishment army has been successful, said a witch sitting beside Alice. They're now extremely aggressive, fearless of life and death, and extremely powerful. Even a feeble assistant which can be transformed into a mighty warrior who isn't inferior to the original extraordinary. In addition, they also have the ability to disrupt the release of magic power, and hence when facing mad demons and lords of hell, both of whom require the stone of driving to fight, they undoubtedly possess a huge advantage. But the incarnation ceremony consumes witches' lives, and I've heard that not everyone can be successfully transformed. Someone said. These are insignificant details. She unfolded her hands. I believe that with the continuation of the research, the Quest Society will be able to remedy this. Don't talk so easily, Elaine. We're already short on numbers, and therefore every witch is precious. That other person frowned. What's the difference between dying in the demon's hands and dying in the ceremony? Elaine raised her head and said. At least with the latter, a contribution is made to the union prior to death. What are you saying? Enough. Alice said softly. Even though her voice was very soft, the scene was instantly silenced. Everyone kept their mouths closed and awaited the Queen's forthcoming words. Mortals cannot defeat the demons, my sisters, she said calmly. We can choose to do nothing but simply enjoy this final moment of peace, and when the next invasion of the demons arrives, we'll be completely consigned to history. Or, we can choose to put up a final fight, placing our hopes in the gods' punishment warriors, and make necessary sacrifices for them. I admit that this is a difficult choice, but as long as there is a chance to prolong the existence of mankind, the spirit and determination of witches will never break. Although I'm the Queen of Starfall City, I'm willing to allow you to make this important choice. Do you want to give up the resistance and die in peace, or do you want to avenge our dead sisters, chase the demons out of the Dawn region, and restore the past glory of witches? It's entirely up to you. Of course, none of us is able to directly participate in the third battle of divine will, hence no matter which choice we make, we can live out our transient lives peacefully. Remember, the choice which you make now isn't only for yourselves, but for the whole group of witches, for our future sisters to still be able to see God's smile. Those who don't agree, please stand up now. Chapter 352 Illusion, Part 2. So, that's what happened then. Maine could not take his eyes off the illusionary scene, and his heart leapt like never before. The incarnation ceremony of the gods' punishment army turned out to be invented by witches in order to defeat the demons, and they willingly sacrificed their own kind. How many of the witches present would stand up and castigate her for her cruelty? The final result was beyond his expectation. After a few minutes, not a single person stood up. Even the witch who questioned the ceremony did not openly oppose Alice's words, albeit gritting her teeth and smacked the table as she thought, how ironic. Having killed so many witches with her own hands, she can still talk about it being for the continuation of witches. Is there anything more ridiculous than this? But she isn't wrong, said an elderly witch. We're after all born of mortals, and thus if mankind was wiped out, witches wouldn't be able to persist either. Conversely, no matter how many witches are sacrificed in the incarnation ceremony, there'll always be new witches to replace them. The more mortals there are, the more witches there'll be. Elaine shrugged her shoulders. Is it certain that the gods' punishment army will defeat the demons? Someone asked. I don't know, said Alice. Before we try, nobody really knows. The defeats in the previous two battles of divine will have already shown that the demons are way stronger than us, and the only way for us to restrict their actions is to use the red mist. This implies that even if we create a large number of God's punishment warriors, it's uncertain that we'll secure the final victory. She paused. But you should be familiar with how I do things. Elaine smiled and said, even if there's only a small chance, we must try our best. I'm willing to follow you wherever. For the continuation of witches. I, too, don't want to admit defeat. Everyone stood up and saluted the Queen of Witches. The witch who raised questions was the last to stand up, but she declared, hopefully you're right. So it's decided. Alice nodded, seeming unsurprised by the result. What we've to do now is to convince the other members of the union. They won't necessarily listen to you, said the elderly witch. If we're to carry out the incarnation without resistance, the witches cannot continue to act in a superior and privileged position. The union must be disbanded, and the past must be completely buried. I'll do my best to convince them, Alice said in a resolute voice. If they aren't able to accept it, Starfall City will carry out this plan alone, and a new order will be made. Shortly, the scene disappeared. Darkness consumed everything again. When light in the secret room was restored, Maine realized that his back was soaked in cold sweat, and his head spun terribly. You look a little tired. Shall I carry you outside? Zero walked over to him and asked. No need. Quickly open the door. Maine said, taking huge gasps of breath. After the metal door was opened, Maine stumbled out of the illusion room, and then covered his mouth as he rushed over to the sanctuary, and knelt in front of O'Brien. After the magic stone was activated, the scene was automatically mapped into your mind, hence feeling discomfort is perfectly normal, the Pope said softly. The first time I came into contact with these, I had the same reaction as you. You will be fine after a short rest. Why didn't I have any problems? Zero asked, embracing the Pope's arms. Because you're a witch, thus your body has long been used to the operation of magic power. O'Brien smiled benignly. Whether in terms of endurance or resistance, witches are universally far superior to mortals. It took a long time for Maine to calm his breath down. This is the church's origin? Yes. After this, Alice led the witches of Starfall City and 2 other cities into battle, eventually emerging victorious, and laid down a new set of rules. Witches were no longer the chosen ones, but instead became the evil ones who were lured into degeneration by demons. This war lasted for nearly 100 years, and is known in the history books as the Battle of Faiths. Did she live for that long? The Pope shook his head. Not long after Alice established the church, she perished along with another transcendent. The second Pope inherited her will and continued to lead the army into battle until they completely subdued 2 other factions. Unfortunately, this battle badly damaged the 3 cities, and they virtually lost control over the world. The mortals who were unwilling to participate in the battle began to settle down in this narrow strait, and led the indigenes to cultivate the land. Gradually, this became what is now the 4 kingdoms. Somehow, O'Brien became more energetic as he spoke, and even his voice became more coherent and no longer as feeble as it used to be. After that, the church continued to eliminate its remaining enemies on many occasions, including mortals who didn't belong to Starfall City. But the world order had already taken shape, and due to a lack of strength, the church was never able to complete the unification of the continent. All of this is due to the early death of the Queen of Witches. Natalia, whom she considered a friend, not only rejected her plan but also suddenly attacked her during a meeting. This was recorded in the unabridged canon. The Pope sighed. If she was still alive, the Battle of Faiths would have ended 50 years earlier, and after the church accepted all witches into its membership, it would have easily unified the continent. No one expected the battle would continue until today. Maine wiped the sweat on his forehead and said, Your Highness, there's something I'm unclear about. Why were the earlier popes all witches, while after that, it became entirely normal people? Zero, you should head back first. O'Brien kept silent for a brief moment before saying, Yes. Only after the pure witch had departed, O'Brien slowly said, because of weakness and cowardice. What? Maine was shocked, and for a moment, he suspected that he had heard wrongly. No, child, you didn't hear wrongly. O'Brien seemed to have read his thoughts. The Pope's eyes gleamed, and he looked as if he had returned to a younger age. In order to restore the witch's glory after defeating the demons, Alice had stipulated that the Pope's position must be taken up by an extraordinary. But extraordinary witches were very rare, and it wasn't always possible to find the ideal candidate. Therefore, a few prominent ordinary witches served as the Pope, but weakness and cowardice were like poisonous snakes in the heart which could never be removed once they appeared. A mortal who served as the archbishop was afraid of being oppressed by the witches someday and therefore usurped the Pope's position. Maine's eyes opened wide. And therefore, the later popes were. Yes, all of us are cowardly descendants who profiteered from the witches' sacrifice. The Pope let out a long and deep sigh. No matter what happens, the Church has to bury this secret forever. He paused. The truth regarding the Battle of Divine Will is recorded in the pivotal secret temple. It's now for you to bear this responsibility and continue the line. Even giving up may also be a wise choice. After saying these words, his whole body abruptly slackened, as if he had put down a heavy load, and he lay down and slumbered on top of the cart. Giving up? If he did so, who else was going to take over this position? But before he had any time to ponder, Maine realized that something was not right with O'Brien. His physical condition took a dramatic turn for the worse, and the spirited look of only a moment ago disappeared. His eyes' muscles relaxed rapidly and the radiance from his eyes slowly faded. Your Highness O'Brien. Maine shook the Pope's body anxiously, but O'Brien stared vacantly at the ceiling with his mouth twitching slightly, as if he was murmuring something. At the last moment, Maine felt him saying, "Child, I'm sorry." Chapter 353, The Quest Society. As the night wore on, a soft ray of light peeked through the cracks of the curtains. It was daybreak. Elsa had barely slept all night. Her head had been spinning with Nightingale's words. The mortals of this continent are the most powerful ones. So much can change in 400 years. Why can't you let go of past ideas? You still have much time ahead of you. You can confirm it with your own eyes. Elsa rolled out of bed and walked over to her clothes rack, resting her hand on the robe of the Tequila Quest Society. As she reminisced about gaining the unanimous approval of the 3 chief witches when she earned this robe, her spirits leaped with joy. Exploring the mysteries of magic power had always been her lifelong pursuit, and the Quest Society's most revered motto was "Existence is Truth." So, if those mortals really could prove their ability. Elsa put on her robe, opened the door, and walked towards the grand hall. In any case, I am probably the last member of the Quest Society, as well as the sole survivor of Tequila. If I want to rebuild a new holy city, it will take more than a couple of days. But before that, I might as well have a look at what this mortal prince could possibly be capable of to have witches at his beck and call. After breakfast, Elsa, accompanied by Wendy, went to the office of the prince with gray hair. At a glance, the prince looked no different from people of 400 years ago. However, he gave off an aura unlike a common mercenary, merchant, or farmer, but it was also different from Kath, her head of family guards. It took only one glance to see right through these kinds of people, whose deepest thoughts were usually very easy to read, as if they were only symbols on a piece of paper. However, she could not perceive the prince in the same way, especially his eyes. Although they were a simple set of gray pupils, they seemed to be filled with indescribable radiance and confidence. More importantly, this confidence was not blind optimism. It exuded a kind of calmness and peacefulness beyond his years. It was as if he had lived for thousands of years, and knew all that was in this world like the back of his hand. Why do I feel this way? He is Roland Wimbledon. Elsa thought, silently memorizing this name. How did you sleep last night? He smiled. Did the oatmeal and fried eggs 400 years into the future suit your tastes? It was SOSO, but it would have been better if you hadn't let a witch barge into my room. He was stunned for a moment, and shook his head resignedly. All right, she will knock next time. Oh, by the way, if you wish to take a stroll outside to explore the town and people's customs, you can ask Nightingale to show you around. If you wish to read history books, you can ask Scroll. She has kept all the books she read in her mind. People's customs? Elsa frowned. With the dangers of demons looming over us, I would love to see how you have the audacity to claim that mortals can defeat demons. If you can't fend off their attacks, all the history and customs are completely meaningless. The prince smirked and said, compared with heavy industry, light industry and civilian livelihood are just as important. Why are you so interested in cannons? What do you mean by light and heavy? Nothing. Never mind, the prince sighed, you will soon see, and we're going to test new weapons this afternoon. But before that, I have some questions to ask you, questions about the holy city of Tequila 450 years ago. New weapons mortals operating? Elsa's mind immediately went to crossbows and mangonels. If he simply updated these weapons, they would not be nearly enough to defeat the demons. However, she did not let her skepticism show. Ask away. You mentioned that the holy city of Tequila was a city ruled by witches and that mortals without magic power could only belong to the lowest class. How many meals did mortals eat in a day? What was their staple food? Did they eat a lot of meat? Elsa was stunned. She did not expect him to ask such questions. There were also ranks within the mortals. The mortals who served senior witches by running errands or protecting the city had the same standing as the weakest assistant witches. Below them were farmers and merchants, and lastly came slaves and coolies. As for what you asked, I have no idea, no witch in the upper city ever paid attention to what mortals ate. As for the guards and servants in my tower, they were all provided with 3 meals a day. Except for the months of the demons, they got to eat meat once a week. What was their salary? What is that, money? She arched her brow. They became my attendants and vowed to serve me for life, and in return I gave them shelter and food, and I imparted my knowledge onto them. They didn't need any other compensation. I see. The prince scribbled furiously on a piece of paper and asked, did the witches participate in farming, livestock breeding, or iron forging? Of course, all of these things were done by assistant witches, Elsa replied. Although they were only assistant witches, they were far superior to commoners. If commoners handled the work alone, they could never fulfill the union's needs. This back and forth went on for almost half an hour. He seemed to be especially interested in basic necessities of life in major witch cities and asked extremely detailed questions, which confused Elsa to no end. Compared with these insignificant matters, isn't he concerned about the demons who have already conquered more than half of the Dawn region and are about to strike again? The prince paused for a moment and handed his notes to Scroll. You said that you were a member of the Quest Society and that this society specifically studied magic stones and magic power? Finally, such a decent question was asked. Elsa nodded, yes, the so-called magic stone is transformed from God's stone of retaliation, and it can suppress a witch's ability, but it can also give her unique powers. These remarks were a shock to everyone. The witch who called herself Tilly blurted, how is it done? Elsa finally felt a rush of her past importance and was quite pleased. For the past 400 years or so, the Quest Society made endless sacrifices to pursue the secret of the relationship between magic power and magic stones. I can share it with you, but you must also share your knowledge of increasing witches' awakening rates in return. Tilly and Roland exchanged a glance, no problem, but I am still confused by one thing. She lifted her left hand, and the blue crystal resting on her finger glinted with a striking light. This magic stone was discovered in the ancient ruins and enabled me to fly. There is no doubt that this type of magic stone is immensely powerful. When battling the demons, it will give troops an advantage in both attacks and retreats. Not to mention, it saved quite an amount of time in my daily commute. She paused, so why did you still retreat on foot? How was it that even a senior awakened witch like you did not have such a convenient magic stone? Chapter 354, The Magic Stone. Agatha froze in shock. She never dreamed that Tilly would have a stone of flight and even figured out how to use it. After hesitating for quite some time, she finally spoke. We only understood the relationship between magic power and magic stones, but we couldn't produce the stones. You couldn't produce them? Tilly asked surprisedly, what does that mean? These magic stones were made by demons, she sighed. If we had a reliable source of magic stones, we would have been able to transform assistant witches into combat witches, and God's punishment army wouldn't exist. Made by demons? The witches couldn't help but look shocked, while Roland's expression darkened. "How much do you know about making magic stones?" he asked, "and how were these magic stones made?" The tone of these two questions sounded a little too blunt, and Agatha initially didn't want to answer them. However, considering that demons were witches' real enemies and that this information would eventually come to light, she stifled her remarks on his rudeness and answered slowly, "There was a strange being among the demons, which we called the Chaos Beast. Its appearance resembled a large flower bud with the height of 3 or 4 people, and it crawled slowly on its tentacles. After it swallowed God's stones of retaliation, it could produce a variety of magic stones, and the speed of this process depended on the type of magic stone being produced." "Have you witnessed this?" "We caught a live beast once." She was extremely irritated by the prince's skepticism. The Bliss army launched a surprise attack on a remote devil's town where there was a chaos beast producing stones of light. Witches brought it back to Tequila and made it work for the holy city. This kind of demon was extremely unintelligent, so it automatically transformed the stones it was fed. Unfortunately, we did not know how to make it produce more powerful stones, and we also didn't know how to raise it. 6 months later, it turned yellow and wilted like an uprooted plant. Afterwards, the Quest Society sent a couple of witches to other devil's towns to investigate. All reports led to the same conclusion: chaos beasts were the only way of obtaining magic stones, and it would take a longer time to produce more powerful stones. Most demons used magic stones in battle. For example, the Mad Demon embedded on its arm a magic stone that could instantly excite its body's energy and give it powerful long-range attacking abilities. All the magic stones we had were seized from enemies' bodies or battalions. "So this stone of flight used to belong to a demon?" Tilly asked curiously. "As far as I know, only a powerful demon leader could have such a magic stone." Agatha sighed, "So it probably belonged to the battle spoils of a transcendent." "What about the types of magic stones?" Roland frowned. "Did they always have all types of magic stones?" "Of course not. If that were the case, humans would have been doomed long ago." She rolled her eyes. "In the first battle of divine will, most demons did not have magic stones. Instead, they relied on their immense bodies and impenetrable armor and attacked human cities with metal spears. This is all recorded very thoroughly in history books. After hundreds of years of war, human territories were conquered bit by bit, until everyone was forced to retreat to the fertile plains. At this, she sighed, that was when we were closest to victory. If we had been led by a witch and had a trained platoon of combat witches, the demons wouldn't have even been able to set foot in the Dawn region. And then they gained access to all kinds of magic stones? I think so. In the second battle of divine will, their attacks became much more varied. Agatha's voice dropped in defeat. This time, we were totally crushed in a matter of 35 years. Although the elite Bliss army was a strong match for the Lords of Avernus, there were many more of the enemy than there were of us. I heard from the elders of the Union that the witches actually had the upper hand for the first 10 years, and that one transcendent could slaughter an entire demon platoon. However, after we began to lose a lot of soldiers, we were forced into the defensive within our city. Then, the prince was silent for a long time and appeared to be considering something very serious. He has finally understood the horror of demons, thought Agatha. Not only were their numbers immense, but their evolution was frightening. Who knows what kind of army will emerge in the next attack? Are Mad Demon, Fearsome Demon, and Lord of Avernus categories you assigned to the demons? Tilly asked as Roland was still lost in thought. Yes, these names became widespread in the second battle of divine will. Before they had their magic stones, there was not much difference between them besides their appearance. How did they reproduce? Agatha stuttered, I don't know. It was never recorded in any books or learned from captives. They couldn't survive for long without the red mist, so we didn't have enough time to understand their language. And the demons who did not need the red mist to survive were all low-level beasts that couldn't communicate. Beasts? Yes. Demons consisted of many different species, but there were 2 main categories, she explained carefully. One had magic power, and the other didn't. The latter didn't need the red mist to survive, but their appearance and intelligence were no different from regular animals. Examples of these beasts were 8-feet reptiles that carried supplies for the demons, and winged devil beasts that could carry demons into the air. Hold on, the prince suddenly frowned and asked, did these devil beasts you mentioned look like this? He took a painting out of a drawer and spread it out in front of Agatha. This is indeed a devil beast. The painting of the winged demon was incredibly lifelike and was no doubt the work of a witch. Have you seen one before? Not too far from here. Roland sipped his tea and continued, I thought it was a demonic beast tamed by the demons. So you're saying that they aren't the same thing? Of course not. Low-level demonic beasts were nothing but food for demons, while powerful mutant demonic beasts were actual threats to demons. When the months of the demons arrived, their attacks usually decreased, giving us some time to recover. Agatha paused and changed the subject to the nearby enemy. If there are Dinothers around, that means a demon's town can't be far away. Where are they? Just west of the Mist Forest, behind a large snow mountain. Roland roughly told her about his investigation. It's completely covered in red mist. No, not completely. Agatha exclaimed, those short stone towers are used to maintain the red mist by evaporating a stored liquid, so they need to be refilled periodically. That's why those demons always hide underground to reduce usage. We can try to capture this battalion. Initiate an attack on the demons, the witches all gasped in fear. There are multi-eyed demons on watch, which meant that there is probably a chaos beast in the battalion. Otherwise, there would not be high-level demons stationed in such a remote and small battalion. She bit her lip. A chaos beast will always preserve its ability to produce its last magic stone. Even if it is not a powerful magic stone, we can still use it to further the research of the Quest Society, and even find the principle of transforming God's Stone of Retaliation. Chapter 355, Miracles. The group of people stared at her, dumbfounded. After a long silence, the prince cleared his throat and asked, isn't the red fog extremely toxic? There's no way for us to approach it, right? It's only toxic to witches. According to the Quest Society's research, normal humans, plants, and animals can all survive underneath the red fog. In addition, fire can speed up its rate of dispersion, Agatha plainly replied. Weren't you the one who said even normal people could fight the devils? Well, prove it for me to see. The winged hybrids can be lured away by our flying witches, she said as she pointed to Tilly. The rest of the people can stand by waiting for us to rouse the devils and lead them into a trap. If what you said is true, taking this stronghold should be a piece of cake. Roland chuckled and shook his head. I forgot to mention this earlier. This investigation trip was done by a hot air balloon, not the flying witches you assumed. This kind of flying device can only carry a dozen people. I'm afraid there's no way we can carry a whole troop of normal soldiers. In addition, he paused, this plan you came up with is highly susceptible to risk. We have no idea just how many devils are lurking around. Close quarters combat will result in casualties, not to mention the dangerous job of luring the devil beasts. I refuse to put my people in such danger. How could anyone have a foolproof plan for fighting the devils? Agatha fumed. Every time the blessed army mobilized its people in the past, everyone went in with the expectation of a bitter battle to the death. As I thought, he's delusional. In order to achieve an end goal, casualties are an eventuality. Only a naive rookie who's never experienced the cruel reality of war would worry so much about every single individual life. Though extremely disappointed, she still controlled her feelings, managing to hide her doubts. In the afternoon, after attending his presentation of this so-called new weapon, everything will become clear. Only now, Agatha no longer harbored any real expectations. They were just a prince who's only fought before on paper, a bunch of witches with support abilities, and finally some fragile and useless ordinary mortals. Even with the most powerful of weapons, how strong could they possibly be? Perhaps from the moment the Union collapsed, humanity had already been destined for destruction. You often spoke of the battle of divine will, why do you call it that? Isn't it simply a war to repel the devil invasion? Roland took a new piece of paper, raised his quill and asked. That's what everyone called it. The history books never recorded the initial reason for the war. Agatha answered in a disheartened tone. It's not wrong to call it a war to repel the invasion. After all, the devils did only come to the land of dawn from the stone gates. What stone gates? Scroll couldn't help but interrupt. The gates of hell that rose from the ground. Agatha sighed. On the eve of the bloody moon, the gates of hell shall open, engulfing the world we know. That's what was written in the history books. Either way, these damned stone gates would appear every few hundred years. The first horde of devils used them to come to the land of dawn and rapidly attempted to murder us all. So the pattern of their invasions is also related to this? They needed the red fog to survive. In order to leave the fog, they had to depend on their own handheld reservoirs, the leather pouches, metal containers, and demonic beast hide tanks. This is also the reason we were even able to have the second or third battles of divine will. Only when the stone gates appeared could the devils build their fog-generating obelisks, which were usually taller than even mountains and had a wide area of diffusion. A single one is enough to cover the entire fertile plains, she explained slowly. If another battle of divine will erupts, the devils will definitely construct an obelisk in the middle of the plains to serve as their base. After it's complete, they'll use their fortresses at the boundaries of the fog to initiate their attack. This time, I'm afraid there's nowhere left for humanity to run. If that day comes, everyone can at least escape to fjords to weather the storm. Tilly shrugged her shoulders. Are you talking about those few islands in the middle of the swirling sea? How many people could a tiny land like that possibly sustain? It's nothing but a place of desperation where one waits for their eventual demise, Agatha snappily retorted. All right, everyone cheer up a little, at least we now have a decent understanding of the devils we're up against. The prince shrugged and said, by the time the third battle of divine will begins, we won't be unprepared. Let's call it a day here. Anything else we can discuss after lunch? Agatha finished her sumptuous lunch and followed Wendy back to her room. Life in the wastelands was a lot more luxurious than she imagined. Both the variety and taste were far superior to that of any feast in her memory. She thought that perhaps this was because she was born in an era of war. Those days, be it in her own stone tower or at the Fortress of the Union, food consisted solely of bread, jerky, and vegetable soup. Yet here salt, butter, and honey were all plentiful, as well as some delicious spices she didn't recognize. Even though she wanted to maintain her image, she nevertheless couldn't help but devour an entire plate of fried mushrooms as well as 2 huge pieces of honeyed steak. However, the more she ate, the angrier she became. She both loathed herself for succumbing to the temptation of delicious food, bringing shame upon Tequila, and loathed the prince for being so short-sighted as to be wasting time savoring delicacies while the humanity walked towards its doom. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but harden her tone and say, I'm already familiar with the castle halls now. You needn't bother with the hassle of escorting me back from now on. It's not a hassle at all. I'm delighted to do these things. Wendy smiled. Also, if you want to talk about anything, I'm always here. Bottling your feelings up in your heart will only make them fester. Didn't he say he was going to show us the new weapons in the afternoon? Why'd he leave all by himself after eating? You mean Roland? This is probably because he's taking a nap. Wendy covered her mouth and whispered, that's His Majesty's habit. Usually after lunch he'll always sleep for at least an hour. His Majesty often says the body is the foundation of all efforts. Without enough rest, it's impossible to fulfill the duties of a lord. An afternoon nap. What kind of habit is this? A whole night isn't enough for him. Agatha angrily thought, this is obviously nothing but a lazy person making excuses, yet you actually wholeheartedly believe him. Be it normal witches or senior awakened witches, why is it that you all have such confidence in him? She took a deep breath. Is it just because he gave you a safe haven? Do you really believe that he can win against the devils? No, even against the church that has been suppressing you all? I can't speak for the other sisters, Wendy gently replied, but I myself do believe in him. Because His Majesty is capable of making the things that no one else imagined, or even dared to imagine, happen. To me, he's someone who's made countless miracles happen. Miracles? When witches everywhere were being hunted to death, he saved the association. When everyone saw us as demons, he created a place where we could coexist in harmony. In a single short year, His Majesty has managed to use an army of peasants to fend off the months of the demons, and defeated Duke Ryan, who had a territory several times of his. Even the mad empowered army of Grey Castle wasn't able to take a single step past our border. But these are merely the battles of mortals, compared with the war between God's punishment army and the devil's. They're completely different. Agatha shook her head. Of course it's not just this, Wendy continued. His teachings and theories allowed four sisters to evolve their abilities, and has unceasingly created increasingly powerful weapons, which allow knights and even ordinary people to win against extraordinaries. These are all miracles that I personally witnessed, not just the wild rumors of a tavern, nor the bombastic descriptions of historical records. They happened right in front of my eyes. One day he'll become the king of Grey Castle, and lead us to defeat any and all of our enemies. Her eyes were filled with mirth, yet her voice was full of confidence. That's what I believe. Chapter 356. Weapons that enable civilians to defeat extraordinaries? After Wendy left, Agatha kept mulling over this phrase. Did they truly know what an extraordinary was? Unfortunately, she did not have a stone of measuring with her to clearly determine the powers and types of these witches. After waiting for an annoyingly long time, Nightingale appeared in her doorway. His Highness invites you to view his new weaponry tests. If you don't want to go. I'll go, she mumbled. Please lead the way. When she saw Prince Roland still groggy and yawning, Agatha had a sudden impulse to dump ice chips onto him to wake him up. However, this move would probably cause some misunderstandings with the other witches, so she could only think about it to herself. As they left the castle, she saw the entirety of the town in broad daylight for the first time. With the snow as a backdrop, the first impression that leaped into her mind was order. All the two-story houses stood in clean rows and had exactly the same appearance, with matching white silhouettes and red tile roofs. The black roads were all straight as an arrow, splitting the town into equal square sections. Looking into the distance, the scenery seemed to be continuous layers of houses, trees, and streets and so on. Even Tequila's inner city could never be this orderly. But she felt there was something about the town that couldn't compare to her city. Except the castle, there were no buildings worth a second glance in this town. Even the castle itself could not compare to Tequila's Quest Tower in grandiosity. After all, it's only a small town. Agatha scoffed inwardly and turned to Nightingale. How many people live here? There used to be only a little over 2,000, but now, with the refugees from the north and south, there are almost 30,000. There were only 2,000, and he claimed to defeat demons. What a stupid, hold on, 30,000? Agatha widened her eyes in shock. Even in its prime, Tequila could only accommodate 50,000 people. Could this tiny place hold 30,000? She wasn't counting the populations of the surrounding villages, right? Although these square brick houses did seem to have a larger capacity than wooden bungalows, the increase of population wasn't merely a simple addition of numbers. After the population reached a certain point, demands on the city would also increase exponentially. Firstly, the demand for food and water would increase dramatically. Secondly, there would be more public safety issues following an increase in slums. Finally, even waste disposal would become a difficult issue. Towards the end of the Second Battle of Divine Will, Tequila faced all of these issues. Following the collapse of many major cities, more and more people flocked to the Holy City. Overpopulation did not strengthen the city's defense, but instead paralyzed the entire city. The Union had to forcefully remove a group of refugees to settle the crisis. After experiencing this firsthand, Agatha knew how difficult the growth of population was. As she observed her companion's casual demeanor, she somewhat distrusted her. Perhaps Nightingale had no idea what she was talking about and was simply lying to her. I should ask Wendy these kinds of questions in the future, she thought. At least she seemed more sincere. After crossing the crowded city streets, Agatha followed the prince and his group onto a city wall made of mud. This kind of short city wall was far from lofty and sturdy. There were no barbs on the surface of the wall, nor was there a moat surrounding it. Demons wouldn't even need machines to climb this wall as they could do so barehandedly. She became more disappointed in her heart. Every 100 steps or so, there were protrusions of flat platforms on the top of the wall, which seemed to be prepared for ballistas. It didn't take a long walk along the wall for Agatha to see the weapon being tested that day. Its appearance was so unique that it commanded everyone's attention. It was a metal tube that looked like an enlarged iron spear, except there was no spearhead. It was entirely smooth and had a slight silver tinge to it, so it didn't seem like a metal weapon. The parts at the ends of the tube were slightly complicated. Besides a stabilizing stand, there were also 2 shorter tubes that were attached to the top and bottom of the large tube. It had no pulleys or slots for arrows, appearing nothing like a larger ballista or mangonel. But she still could not figure out how this thing could attack enemies. This is a newly invented weapon of Border Town, the 152mm Stronghold Standard Artillery, symbolizing justice and glory. The prince exclaimed, waving his hands. We made many improvements on the basis of the 12-pound field artillery, and it's outstanding in all respects. It's undoubtedly a revolutionary weapon. Agatha couldn't help but frown. All this talk of justice, glory, and stronghold standards sounded extremely superficial. Not to mention that the long string of introductions was a mouthful of made-up words. Was he really the prince, whom, as Wendy introduced, was learned and trusted by all witches? Clap, clap, clap. Nightingale was the only person clapping, and the atmosphere seemed a little awkward. Ahem, Roland cleared his throat. Let's not waste our breath and start testing. Iron Axe, take it away. Yes, Your Highness. 3 people dressed in the same uniforms immediately stood up and got to work. Agatha stood on the side and followed every movement of these men, hoping to understand the workings of this weapon. She watched one man slide off the metal piece at the end of the tube, and another immediately stuff an orange sharp object into the tube and shut the metal piece. Report. Preparation is ready. Prepare to launch. Everyone, cover your ears. The prince demonstrated with his hands, nodded, and said, Fire. Wait, is it ready this quickly? Just as Agatha was about to ask, a large boom exploded next to her ears. Her head immediately began buzzing, and her surroundings quieted. The long metal tube spat out a ball of orange flames, blinding yet fleeting. In that moment, she sensed the immense power of the fire, and felt the city wall trembling beneath her feet. A wave of heat rushed towards her, pushing her back a few steps. The cannon itself also suddenly sank back suddenly, but then it steadily returned to its original position. Nightingale supported her in time from behind and seemed to say something to her, but she could only hear fragments of whispers, as if they were coming from far away. Finally, the buzzing subsided, and her hearing was back to normal. Are you okay? She shook her head, looking towards the fields of snow, but couldn't see any change. Were those flames only good for intimidating the enemy? Did you see the landing point? The prince asked a witch with green hair. It fell behind a small hill, nearest to the red flag, the latter said after peering out for some time, but it was still much farther. Red flag? Agatha looked at Roland with puzzlement. What are they talking about? Luckily, the prince quickly addressed her confusion. This weapon can fire shells, or bolts that you're familiar with, to a long distance, so it's used to attack enemies far away. In order to observe the range of attack, I had lightning place colored flags every 1 kilometer, and the red flag was the last one at 5 kilometers away. He explained, by your measurements, 1 kilometer is a little over 300 yards. Agatha was stunned. Is he saying that that weapon fired a bolt over a distance of more than 5,000 meters? There were no pulleys or power storing mechanisms. How did they make it? Even siege beasts driven by magic power could only reach a range of 1,500 to 2,000 meters. If he was not lying, then a tall and sturdy city wall, combined with these kinds of weapons, could really fend off the demon's attack. But, it's probably not very easy for a weapon with such an astonishing firing range to fire even once. It just doesn't feel right without seeing where the shells landed. The prince stroked his chin and said, Next, let's test a fast triple-shot flat aim to attack targets in short range. Chapter 357, Unfinished Work. The second time it fired, Agatha covered her ears up in advance. Then she saw an incredible scene. There was no endless charging work that she expected. Gigantic as the long metal pipe seemed, it was actually not as heavy as it looked like. Every shot seemed to shake the earth up. However, its base remained absolutely still, as if the pipe and the base were not related at all. The long tube was quick and accurate each time in terms of backing and resetting, and this process did not even require human control. Only 3 of the 4 operators were busy working, while the commander Iron Axe was just standing aside issuing orders. Withdrew the metal stopper, slid off the copper shell, stuffed the new bolt, and then fired, and repeated the process. Agatha could feel the ground-shaking anger of the earth almost every 10 breaths. At the same time, she also witnessed the soil and the snow columns kicked up one after another by the flat fire at a close distance. The prince did not lie that this weapon truly shot the bolt out at a speed that was impossible to capture with naked eyes. Judging from the interval between the firing time and the time when the snow columns were kicked up, it could be concluded that even a transcendent would absolutely have no way to avoid the attack. Agatha looked at this silver-white long tube weapon and could not help being amazed. If Tequila was guarded by such a powerful weapon at that time, we should have been able to keep all the frightful demons below the city walls, and thereby prevented falling into the dilemma of attrition after the walls were destroyed. The war would perhaps not have gone that bad either. Was this weapon created by witches? After quite a while, she swallowed a mouthful of saliva and asked quietly. From its bright and shiny appearance, this could absolutely not be handcrafted by mortals with iron hammers. However, the prince's reply greatly surprised her. This is a masterpiece jointly created by witches and mortals, he smiled and said. Witches took care of everything from smelting to casting the long-sung cannon, whereas alchemists were responsible for shells that were used to fire. By the way, the witches who have been engaged in manufacturing are all what you call assistant witches except Anna. Agatha felt that her long-standing idea was suddenly shaken. She thought she had been kind and generous enough to mortals, and for this she had been even marginalized by the Quest Society. However, it now appeared that what she had done was far from enough. Is that true that the Union had been wrong all the way from the beginning? Did it mean that what the prince said, namely mortals can defeat demons, was actually right? Yet if the cooperation between witches and mortals can generate such powerful strength, then why did the first battle of Divine will end up with a disastrous defeat? With questions continuously coming to her mind, Agatha started to feel very confused. When the long-sung cannons jetted out flames in succession, Tilly was greatly shocked as well. Although she once stood on the top of the city wall and saw shells being fired at demonic beasts, the drawbacks of those firearms were also quite evident. It was hard to target at a long distance, and it could not shoot downwards if enemies drew close. It was only at somewhere in the middle that they were able to exert the optimum power. However, as the loading was sort of slow, it was very likely that swift hybrid demonic beasts may have already arrived at the foot of the city walls before they had time to ignite them. Furthermore, in order to quickly load and shoot, 5 to 10 people were required to run a mortar team. The weapon operation would be affected even a single step went wrong. Besides, it required someone to specially keep an eye on the combustion source upon ignition. When there was heavy rain, field artilleries probably would not be useless. Nevertheless, the long-sung cannon newly developed by Roland did not have the aforesaid deficiencies. Charging from the rear of the cannon enabled the muzzle to stay lower than the breech, and thereby largely increased the efficiency of close-range shooting. The firing rate was also multiplied several times, yet the staff was reduced to 3 people. Meanwhile, the cannon did not need to be lit by open fire, which meant that they could operate even in harsh weather. As its attacking scope was far greater than that of mangonels, it totally deserved what Roland referred to as an epical weapon. Although they currently relied on witches' abilities to manufacture such weapons, Tilly believed that this was only temporary. Sylvie's observation could verify this. In the past, only Chief Knight was equipped with automatic weapons, but now each soldier had one in their hand. Anna only needed to create the facilities and equipment for the manufacturing of such weapons. specific casting and assembling work could be independently completed by laborers. From Ash's and Anderlia's looks, one could tell that the Longsong cannon was something that they could not possibly imagine. It was nice to have such an ally, but as a brother, she felt he was even more distant. She even had a feeling that Roland had gone far ahead of her. This made Tilly a little frustrated. If only he could be more frank. Seeing the shells that were produced with great difficulty exhaust in a blink, Roland felt his heart was aching. In spite of this, he still had to put on an inscrutable look to cover up his unwillingness. This was not a new cannon testing in a real sense. In order to achieve a brilliant demo effect, he asked Iron Axe to borrow a group of elite artillery from the artillery battalion and had them start on simulative shooting practice a few days beforehand, during which they also carried out 2 rounds of ball firing practice. This was nothing but a forced demonstration specially prepared for the witches. The shooting went on well, and the result was also excellent. At least from Agatha's shocked look, one could tell that the performance of the cannons had blown her mind. Nonetheless, to Roland, the firing performance of this Longsong cannon was far from ideal. Except for the sacred caliber of 152 mm, the rest of it was not even close to that of the real 152. With Anna's ability in precision machining, Lucia's in element purification and Sylvie's in crack detection, theoretically, he could manufacture modern cannons in a real sense, rather than a replica that only had a shooting range of 7 to 8 kilometers. The key lay in details. For now, it appeared that the setting of its chamber was too small. In consideration of the weight of fixed ammunition, Roland decreased the volume of the chamber on purpose, which resulted in insufficiency in powder charge. Although it had a long barrel of 40 caliber, its shooting range was still unsatisfactory. Another thing was propellant. Since nitroglycerin was still in the process of testing, all that was loaded to the cannons was nitrocotton. This was also a reason why Roland felt it was a pity that the nitrocotton consumed by a few shells was enough to load thousands of bullets. In addition, these smokeless propellants had not been gelatinized, which further decreased the powder charge. Finally, the shell itself was after all a larger version of the bullet. If the bullet had not been charged, it all relied on kinetic energy to create lethality. Missing the target meant zero harm. At this stage it could only be used to attack some slow enemies. Overall, there was still a long way to go before they were able to barrage and cover every inch of the earth with cannon shells. However, Roland felt he probably did not have as much time as he initially expected. Ever since he knew that the transformation of the magic stone was originated from demons, he felt increasingly alert deep down inside. If demons also had their own scientific technologies, would they enjoy an advance by leaps and bounds in these technologies at some point? Chapter 358, Invitation. This was not a wild guess, but it could be best proved by the development of human civilization. It took mankind nearly 1,000,000 years to enter the Iron Age from the Stone Age, but only 3,200 years from the Iron Age to the Age of Steam. From the Age of Steam to the Electric Age, it merely took 150 years, and the world directly stepped into the Information Era in another 50 years. From the information Agatha disclosed, demons were not an invariable race. Over 800 years ago, they combated in a close range with knives and shields made of bronze and pig iron, fighting in a similar way to mankind. In order to compete against witches, some senior demons would also wear god stones of retaliation. Every time they attacked a city, demons generally did not have any effective countermeasures for long-distance weapons such as crossbow bolts and mangonels, and therefore always suffered great loss before conquering a fortified city. If they were not born to possess such immense power, perhaps mankind would have become the ultimate victor of the first battle of divine will. Nevertheless, demons had already been able to mass-produce magic stones in the second battle of divine will, and their groups had also experienced differentiation. Demons of various forms took on diverse operation missions, and even mad demons who outweighed in number had also developed measures for long-distance attack. According to Agatha, they even created transportation tools and engineering instruments driven by magic stones. Now more than 400 years had passed. How far had they evolved? Roland originally thought Agatha would bring him the magic stone technologies from Tequila's Quest Society, and based on them, he would be able to wedge a new path of industrial development, but he did not expect that such technologies were from the enemies. In that way, the competition against demons would very likely become a war between industrial and magic stone technologies. Only the one that develops technologies faster will win in the end. At this thought, Roland could not help but heave a sigh. It seemed necessary to have a thorough discussion with Tilly. Roland met Tilly Wimbledon at his office after dinner. He felt pleased when he saw she came alone, at least there had been great progress in terms of trust between them. "Nightingale told me you want to discuss something with me." She took a seat and came straight to the point. "Yes." Roland poured a cup of tea and handed it over to her himself. "It's mainly about how to cope with the third battle of divine will and our future." Tilly took the teacup and blinked, seeming to wait for him to continue. According to Agatha, the Four Kingdoms was merely a tip of the Land of Dawn, and that even the barbarian land used to be the most prosperous fertile plains. It was after being defeated by demons twice that human beings had to retreat to this place. Based on the time the stone gates opened, the third battle of divine will is at the corner. Roland hesitated for a moment and stated bluntly, "I hope you can stay." Tilly smiled faintly after a short pause and said, "I didn't expect you would say that. The strength of demons is unpredictable, and we must gather all the powers available to win the war." Although Agatha said the first battle of divine will was operated by both mortals and witches, it was very likely that their cooperation was only on the surface, which essentially had no difference from the second battle of divine will. He addressed in a sincere tone, "As you've already seen, the excess of the memories in my head possesses weapons sufficient to defeat demons. Once these memories are converted to physical entities, mortals can also burst out powers beyond imagination. The right choice is to have witches take care of the operation of war machines, while ordinary people fight in the war. Upon a big war, one more person means one more source of strength." Tilly took a sip of the tea and did not answer for quite a while. Roland felt his heart was in his throat. Yet under such circumstances, there was no use feeling vexed. He put on a composed look, waiting silently for Tilly to speak. After 7 minutes or so, Tilly finally heaved a sigh and broke the silence. "If I stay, what about the witches on the sleeping island?" "Does that mean," she agreed. Roland restrained his excitement. "Ask them to come to the border town. They are totally welcome here. I'll mark off a plot of land for your witches, and each of them will be equally paid as those in the witch union. I don't mean making them members of the union. They'll still be led by you. It's like establishing a special autonomous district in the Western region. This is not only convenient for our cooperation, but also helpful to boost the mutual understanding between us." "Will they be equally paid?" She could not help but smile. "You don't mind their abilities? You know most of them can't fight for you." No, Roland waved his hand repeatedly and said, "In the cooperation model I have conceived, assistant witches, on the contrary, can play a more important role than combat ones, because it isn't themselves that are strengthened, but hundreds of thousands of ordinary people. Nature doesn't lack power, but lacks people who discover and make use of them. In this regard, the abilities of assistant witches are far greater." "Is this your real purpose?" she asked slyly. It's indeed a generous offer." Tilly smiled, shaking her head. "In view of the public concerns, I can't refuse your request to jointly fight against the intrusion of demons. In view of the personal concerns, I also want to stay here to learn the interesting knowledge. However, I can't give you my consent now." A bit surprised, Roland immediately asked, "Why?" "Since I am the leader elected by the witches on the sleeping island, I can't decide their future based on my personal preference. Once moved to the Western region, the organization will inevitably lose its independence. If something happens, they'll be too vulnerable to resist. If one day there are conflicts between us, should all the witches have to pack up and return to the sleeping island again? No, I'll never." "I can't put their future in an oral promise," Tilly interrupted. "If you were me, would you surrender everything of yours to me simply because we are allies?" Roland was instantly speechless. He knew the answer even without thinking about it. If he himself was in such a situation, he would never agree with others easily. Most of the time, the closer two people are, the more likely they'll have conflicts. That's exactly what the so-called befriending a distant state while attacking a neighbor means. The same applies to powers and lovers. See? You are worried about the same thing as I am. But, you are my younger sister. I won't hurt you. Roland had no choice but to make the last effort. Really, but for the reason you just said, I still can't trust it. Tilly closed her eyes somewhat melancholy. This is probably why I can't promise you right away. She paused for a little bit, as if she wanted to leave those thoughts behind. Let's just treat each other as an ally for now. I will give my full support to the construction of Border Town. If you need witches, I'll try to meet your requirements as much as I can. If it's really hard to resist the attacks from demons, you can still return to Sleeping Island and spend the rest of your life in peace. This is all that I can do so far. Chapter 359, Different Choices. The fire in the fireplace shook for a second and fainted. Nightingale revealed herself, and put some firewood inside. Cracking sounds came from the fireplace and the flames suddenly rose up. Roland looked at the stretched shadow of the cup and took a deep exhalation. Tilly had been away for some time, and he had been recalling their conversation to see if there was any way to change the result, but it ended up in vain. Trust is very intriguing, and only by taking a lot of time can he earn someone's trust. It seems that you're not capable of everything, said Nightingale. She brushed off the dust on her hand and sat back at her usual place. What on earth did you say to her that day? A white lie. Roland leaned on the chair. It's very normal that she doesn't believe it. He paused and said, You said that you had a younger brother. If he suddenly becomes very different than he used to be, and keeps saying that he's still himself, will you believe him? Do you mean that guy who looked innocent but then betrayed me at the back? Nightingale twitched her mouth. As far as I see, he was basically no different than a mutation. Well, I shouldn't have mentioned this. It doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm not a member of Jellin family anymore, and they're just strangers to me. She said carelessly. She and I were once just like strangers as well. Roland sighed and continued, or I would rather say that I didn't get along well with anyone in the palace. If you feel bored, you can share it with me. Nightingale gave a subtle smile. I've been very curious about the royal life, but I also want to know how bad you were at that time. How could you be so bad that your notorious reputation was even spread to the Silver City? To be honest, back then I was much worse than now. Roland could not help but raise his lips. He picked some stories from his memories and said briefly, probably from the moment she fell onto the glass slag, she began to hate me. It's indeed terrible, she clicked her tongue and continued, but I think she doesn't hate you now. Oh? Roland raised his eyebrows and asked, How could you know that? Of course I know. Didn't she say these words, in view of the personal concerns, I also want to stay here to learn the interesting knowledge. Nightingale imitated. It sounded like a consolation, but the truth is that she didn't lie about it. If she still hates you as much as she did in the past, she would never feel like staying here. Are you comforting me? Roland smiled and said. I'm just telling the truth, she shrugged and continued, and I think it's fine to maintain the status quo. Why? She promised to give priority to providing witches for the town to support you against demons, so there's no difference whether she stays here or not. If the witches on the Sleeping Island all come to the town at the same time, with more witches like ashes, I may be very busy. Nightingale threw a dried fish into her mouth and muttered, Not everyone is as obedient as Maggie. Roland could not help but laugh. It sounds like that you had some issues with ashes before? Oh? Of course not. How could it be? Nightingale waved her hands and said, I just keep my eyes on her occasionally to prevent her turning against the witch union. Really? She turned her head to another side and whistled. I'm not sure if it's an illusion. Roland stared at her. Why do you feel so happy when I was rejected? That's an illusion, affirmed Nightingale, and then she looked at the door. Well, someone is coming. With these words she concealed herself. Was it just her excuse to get away? Just at this moment, someone began to knock on the door outside the office. Roland was very surprised. It was almost midnight now. Who would come at this time of the night? He changed a new candle for the candlestick and said, "Come in." The visitor was Agatha. The prince was shocked for a moment and asked, "What's the matter?" She didn't reply but came to sit down at the round stool beside the table. Ms. Wendy said that the flintlock that can fight against extraordinaries and the cannon with an amazing long shooting range were both your ideas. Is it true? And the theories behind these things and their manufacturing methods are all recorded in the book she wrote? Do you mean natural science theoretical foundation and elementary chemistry? There are related theories in them, but as for their manufacturing methods, they're not written down because of length, said Roland. After all, they are just textbooks for elementary theories. Do you come to see me just for this? Only members of the Witch Union can learn such knowledge, right? She didn't reply but continued to ask. Roland nodded and had almost figured out what she wanted to say. Then I applied to join the Witch Union, Agatha said without a pause. But the Witch Union is an organization belonging to the border town. Are you sure you want to work for the town? He said with curiosity. Its lord is not a transcendent but just an ordinary mortal. Any mortal that can create weapons to defend demons is not ordinary at all. Even in the Quest Society, there'll be a place for you. Agatha paused for a little bit and said, as long as it does no harm to the witches and it's not against the survivors of the Union, I don't mind cooperating with a mortal. Probably it's a little hard for her to say to work for a mortal at the moment, but Agatha's capability of accepting new things had impressed Roland a lot. Perhaps someone who was engaged in research was always able to accept new things quickly. He restrained himself from smiling and said, I thought you would follow Tilly to the Sleeping Island, which is a city built by the witches. It's just a refuge for hiding from the hunting of the church. She shook her head and said, I've learned about everything from them before I made this decision. And I've seen so many cities ruled by the witches before I was frozen, yet they were all gone without any traces. It'll be meaningless if we cannot defeat demons. I wish I could see the hope of victory here. You will, Roland nodded, but as to not be against the Union. I cannot promise that, because it probably hasn't been gone, but just changed its name and covered itself up. What? Agatha was shocked. I've thought about what you said carefully. Even if you ran away from Tequila after it was defeated, there were still transcendents and many blessed warriors in the Union. On this undeveloped land in which many original inhabitants are living, they can't entirely extinct unless they intend to do so. Roland said in a deep voice, the church is probably a transformation of the Union. It were not the mortals that took away the power and the methods of creating God's punishment army from the witches, but the witches themselves did that and turned the Union into an organization that hunted witches. In this way, it's more convenient for them to create a large number of God's punishment armies. Are you saying that it's the Union that has led to the tragic situation where witches are oppressed and hunted? She said in great surprise. I'm not sure yet. It's just a guess. Roland stood up and went to the bookcase, took out several thick black books and handed them to her. You can find their chronology written by the church itself, and the histories of the 4 kingdoms written by astrologers. You can make reference to them. In any case, the church is now our enemy that we must eliminate in the future. If you decide to stand on the side of witches and fight against demons with me, you're most welcome at the Witch Union. Chapter 360, Ice. Early in the next morning, Agatha received parchment scroll from Roland. What is it? A contract. After you leave your fingerprint on it, you'll officially become a member of the Witch Union. She spread the scroll of paper, carefully read the contents in it and asked in surprise, that's all? Yup. Roland seemed a little confused about what she said. Why ask? The restrictions on it are useless. Agatha pointed to the part of services and continued, it just mentions that witches cannot betray border town unless the mutual agreement between both parties is breached, but there isn't any restricting measures. If a witch does want to break the contract, she might have no pressure at all. Besides, and the wordings are way too loose. Is this a real contract? Well, I just wrote it casually and it's just a kind of formality. The prince nodded without any surprise. It seemed that Agatha was not the first one to point out the loopholes of this contract. It's a formality full of loopholes. Secretly criticizing the contract in her mind, she then touched the ink pad and put her thumbprint on it. There were very few requirements for both parties in the contract of the witch union. According to the articles, Agatha could barely see any differences after she joined the witch union. Although she thought it was unnecessary to sign the contract, she felt much relieved than before. She said she would work with the mortals, but she knew it well that the man with gray hair was the real leader of the union. If she had to work for a mortal like the way she served the union or the leader of 3 cities with the utmost deference, she would probably not accept it. But now, she was at least free to a large extent. Roland put away the contract and asked curiously, what were the restrictions on the contract of tequila? It was only used for recruiting the mortals and the penalties included corporal punishment and mental torture. She twitched her mouth. As for us witches, we didn't need such contracts. Once you joined the union, you should serve it for your lifetime and there was only death for traitors. Okay, he took a breath and said, welcome to the witch union. After breakfast, remember to come to the castle garden. I need to test your ability comprehensively. The ability test was much easier than what Agatha thought. All she needed to do was to show every characteristic of her ability once in front of the prince and answer some questions. The form of the magic power is a sky blue pentagonal prism and it's a medium level. It belongs to the summon category. Your ability has evolved once. The initial performance is creating a low temperature, and it can freeze at a normal temperature after evolution, which is a very convenient ability. Roland asked after recording the results, how did you get evolved? Constant practice and a sudden enlightenment, she proudly said. As the youngest High Awakened, she was called the genius of tequila by all the members of the union. Every day I kept trying to lower the temperature to freeze the water instantly. One day, I saw a witch who manipulated the flame to melt a piece of lead into liquid, and as the lead was heated by the flame, the lead water began to boil. This scene made me realize that everything may have 3 states, gaseous, liquid, and solid. Lead is solid at room temperature, but if the temperature is high enough, it can also turn into gas. Water is liquid at room temperature, and when the temperature falls, it can freeze into ice. So for gas at normal temperature, can it freeze as long as the temperature is low enough, just like the case of the lead? With this idea, I quickly felt the magic power in my body changing entirely, and I finally evolved into a senior witches. This enlightenment is also recorded in the general principles. In fact, she was the youngest witch whose enlightenment was recorded in that book. Back then, even all the 3 chiefs praised her, for such enlightenment was very significant in enlightening witches to evolve and in practical research. However, when she said those in a serious manner, Roland was quite calm. I see. The prince nodded. What is the general principles? Wait. Aren't you surprised at all? Agatha asked surprisedly. The world is full of gas everywhere. It can be anywhere and without any weight. Actually, the gas can turn into flowing water and frozen ice. They are very normal phenomena, and there are many kinds of gases, each of which has different boiling points and melting points. Roland shrugged. Why should I be surprised? These are common sense in natural science theoretical foundation. Agatha was quite shocked and hurt, and she took 2 deep breaths and said, all right, I'll read it carefully. The general principles. It records the feelings and experiences of the High Awakened during their evolution, she said in discontent, but the abilities of witches are different from each other, which makes it very difficult for them to evolve by imitation and referencing. So this book is of course uncomparable to your natural science theoretical foundation. Did I say something wrong? The prince was quite confused. No, I'm too arrogant. Agatha was unhappier now. Well. He seemed to figure out the reason, so he changed the topic quickly. You just said that the abilities of the witches are different from each other, so there's no one sharing the same ability among thousands of witches in the Union? No, she replied bluntly, the Quest Society believes that the form of magic power decides the ability, but there are no witches sharing the same form of magic power. But when you first saw Anna, you could instantly tell that it was the ability of fire control. It's just an informal categorization, which is easy to understand. The abilities of generating light and heat can be categorized into fire control, but with the development of magic power, consolidation after growing up, or high awakening, similar abilities will change greatly. Even at the initial stage of fire control, some witches are good at controlling the temperature, some generating greater fire, and some throwing the fire. Even if there are no obvious differences, it's because of the lack of careful observation, Agatha said. The Quest Society's categorization method was much more formal and basically the same as yours. Also 3 categories? Roland asked. 4. The main difference is the summoning type. The Quest Society divided it into 2 categories, magic power and shaping. You can understand the difference from the literal meanings. The former means that the summoning of the ability costs magic power all the time, just like Anna's. When the magic power is gone, the summoning of the ability will stop. And shaping can exist for a very long time, just like the coding drawn by Soroya, right? Although I don't know the exact ability of Soroya, it's pretty much like that. That can stay for a long time can be taken as shaping, such as my ability of freezing at a normal temperature. Understood. Roland recorded these contents as well. That's all for the test today. Usually, if you receive no assignment from me, you can practice your ability as you wish, but I'm thinking that someone might urgently need your help. Who? Kyle Sichi, the chief alchemist of Border Town.